Okay, it looks like we are being live streamed, and now I will pick us live on the cloud. So we are now recording.
All right, it is 4:30. Before we formally get started, I'll ask Mrs. Parrish to unmute herself and let me know when she is ready to proceed.
I'm ready. Thank you.
Very good. Lawrence, how about you? Are you ready to proceed?
Yes, sir. Thank you very much.
All right. All right, here we go. Welcome to the July 28th, 2021. Oh, excuse me, I knew I was going to do something wrong. I was reading off the old script. Lawrence, you should have sent me the new one. Welcome to the August 11th, 2021 BAR Large Virtual Meeting. My name is John Robinson. The other board members present this afternoon are Jay White, Leon Scott, James Metters. Luda Subchuk, our regular member, is not able to be here tonight, so Eddie Fava is serving in her place. City staff present this evening are Tori Parrish, Lawrence Courtney. The order of the meeting will be as follows. There will be an introduction and overview of the project by city staff to the board and for the public. There will then be an application presentation with a 10-minute time limit, or additional time may be extended as determined by the chair, and any questions of the applicant by the board or staff. Any and all presenters should clearly state their name for the record. Persons affiliated with the project, be they the owners, developers, designers, consultants, or other affiliated persons, should speak during this portion rather than during the public comment period. There will then follow a public comment period, which will have a 10-minute time limit or an extension of time as determined by the chair. The applicant does not respond to comments made during the public comment period. Any person speaking during the public comment period should clearly state their name for the record. Public comment period is followed by time for city staff comments and recommendations. This is followed by the applicant response or clarification to public comment and city staff comments and recommendations period. This is a 5-minute period in which the applicant can respond or clarify to any information presented by going back to their presentation or addressing specific points raised by the city. The applicant is reminded that they are only to speak after the expiration of that time limit if called upon by staff or the board. There then follows a potential board discussion and vote. The applicant presentation and public comment period are now closed. The applicant may clarify inaccurate information when recognized by the chair by raising their hand and waiting to be called upon, but otherwise may only speak if asked a question by a board member or staff. This evening we have 2 items that have been withdrawn, which we will go through as we go down the agenda. This is a reminder to the public, please turn off all cell phones and other devices. Please limit your comments to architecture only. Comments related to zoning, such as parking, traffic, lot coverage, and livability concerns are not within the purview of this board and therefore cannot be voiced or addressed here. Read some additional protocol for our applicants and the public. Staff will control the PowerPoint presentation this evening that includes everything submitted by the applicant by the deadline in accordance with submittal requirements. Applicants simply need to ask staff to advance to the next slide during their presentation. Applicants, staff, and board members are required to give their name when speaking. Video and microphone has been disabled for all attendees. Attendees, not board members or staff, will only be given the capabilities to speak when they're called upon during the public comment period. The chat and Q&A functions have been disabled for everyone. This is a reminder regarding public comments. The applicants, meaning all team members, and the public have been required to register in advance indicate the project they wish to comment on, and submit any documents in advance of the meeting. Just as in an in-person meeting, all applications heard today are part of a public meeting format. If you've registered and will speak during the public comment portion of the meeting, you will need to state your name and address for the record. Those members of the public that have registered will be called upon in order by project. Staff will call on registered members of the public to speak for each project. Unregistered members of the public who raise their hand will not be called upon. Additional protocol regarding board procedures. The board is reminded that board members will be polled by the chairperson for comments for their vote on a motion. Each member, when voting, should respond yea in favor or nay not in favor. The chair shall reread the motion verbatim, and the board member making the motion should correct the chair if he has not reread the motion accurately. If a board member needs to recuse, he or she will be temporarily removed from the meeting and placed back in the meeting at the start of the next agenda item. If the board needs to go into executive session, they will call into a separate conference line, and all video and audio on Zoom will temporarily be turned off until they're ready to be returned to the regular meeting. Results and staff comments will be posted on the city website, which is www.charleston-sc.gov/BAR. These proceedings are being recorded and broadcast on the City of Charleston's YouTube channel. Mrs. Parrish, what is agenda item 1 for this evening?
All right, agenda item number 1, and thank you, Mr. Chair. Agenda item number 1 was 102 President Street. The request was for final approval, but this application has been withdrawn by staff. So we're going to move on to item number 2.
Great. And what is agenda item number 2?
194 Cannon Street. The request is for final approval of new construction of a 175 room hotel. Wow, can you imagine that? This is in the Heights District, 85, 125, and in the Old City District. Oh, you've got context slides this time. So we have an aerial view here of the site. This site is actually for items number 2 and 3, you'll notice. It's between Cannon and Spring Street. West Edge is to the west there. And the site is currently occupied by an old Wendy's restaurant. So this is looking north into the site. And some more pictures of the Wendy's. This is looking northwest, and that's West Edge over there to the left. And from this one, we're looking east on Spring Street. The site is on the left. We're going to run through the previous staff observations. The last time you all had this in front of you was on April 14th. And the comments were not very lengthy, so I will be reading them. Number 1 was at the very prominent west elevation. The ground floor was more successful with 3 bays of glazing rather than one of the bays filled with mechanical fins. Is it possible to orient the generator as it was oriented in the conceptual package? Number 2, as noted at the conceptual approval review, the 4th floor cornice detailing should be further developed. 3, the pattern on the panels beneath the 1st floor storefront windows is elegant and coordinates with the pattern on the VTAC screen panels. However, we would recommend a restudy of the proposed pattern due to its horizontal emphasis and its inability to respond differently to different panel widths. And 4, we would recommend continued study of the window recesses for any additional depth and relief. The staff recommendation was preliminary approval with staff comments. All right, we're going to have the applicant present.
All right, who is with us for the applicant this evening?
This is Jeffrey Rendering with Ellis 3P. Can you hear me okay?
We can. Jeffrey, how are you this evening?
Doing well. How about yourself?
Fine. You have the floor.
Perfect. Thank you. You can advance to the next slide. Just to go over the comments, just respond real quick. For number 1 there, referring to the generator, the generator louvers on the west side. We did study this as much as we possibly could due to the nature that the intake and exhaust louvers of a generator room need to be separate. We found that this was the best location for them. So we would have intake on the west side and exhaust on the south side of that room. There was really no other area for us to place that program. Number 2 there, talking about the cornice detailing. You'll see as we dive into the details, we can look at that one as well, that they've all been fully developed. Number 3, the pattern beneath the windows. Again, that area has been developed as well, and you'll see that in the overall elevations. And then number 4, the window depths have been studied to maximize the recess and the depth of those windows, and you'll see that in our details as well. They vary between, obviously the pilasters change, but they will be between 12 and 10 inches from the face of the pilaster to the glass. Additional board comments about the blade sign. We do have exterior signage as part of this package that we'd like for you all to provide some comments on if you'd like. Obviously, we know this will be a separate submission, but we wanted to put them in here for now just to get your reaction to them. Concern at the pattern of the VTAC screen. Again, this will be further developed once we have a subcontractor and fabricator on board. But we do feel like the pattern balances the need for airflow to the VTAC, but also provides a decorative element. The jam condition, number 3 comment there, again, was studied further. We did return to a traditional brick return, and you'll see those in our details as well. You can advance to slide number 4. One more slide. Yep, there you go. Just briefly talking about the overall site landscape design here. As you can see, not much has changed. You can go to the next slide, probably it'd be easier to see a little bit larger. So at the north there along Spring Street, the landscaping and the site walls were simplified. We used to have some build outs from the columns. Those have been removed since we could not do them all the way down the facade, we removed them all together. This becomes a more cohesive design. The southeast corner also was updated slightly with the paving patterns in the sidewalks. And that was due to TRC comments that we received in the last submission there. Next, let's see here. You can go to probably page 9, so you can skip a couple slides here. This one right here. So I just want to briefly just kind of show you the lighting concept for the site. The red squares that you will see there, it might be a little hard to see from this zoomed out, but the red squares you see will be the path or garden light, which is obviously the taller one there on the right side of your screen. And then the round circles are wall sconce fixtures. But this will be embedded in the low walls that we have around the site, planter low walls at the terrace and top right corner there, the south or the northeast corner. Also underneath the building, the low wing building, we elected to go with path garden lights in lieu of having lights in the soffit of the building above, just so this would be more intimate space and not overly lit, but obviously light the path enough to traverse across that in the evening time. We'll also have lit bollards around the kind of turnaround there as well. Obviously those weren't called out as different, but you'll see those in the renderings. You can advance to slide 13, please. So here we got the renderings. I guess I should have said stopped in the previous one, but this one's fine. Not much has really changed from the exterior itself. The overall design is still the same and all intact. There's been some updates to the ground floor windows, which we'll see a little bit later here. But I briefly wanted to talk about the materials in this slide. The entire 11th floor and that curved corner that you see there, all that bronze material, bronze colored material will be done out of FRP. This is so we can have a continuous and smooth curve. We looked at doing it with metal panel, but they would have to be faceted and can't produce the profiles that we're trying to achieve there. Next slide, please. Here you can see that northeast entry, corner entry, the canopy has been updated. We used to have 3 separate canopies at the ground floor. This has been merged into one continuous curved canopy with recesses at those metal pilasters, and that's where the water will discharge and through little birds' mouths. And then the other canopies obviously have been updated as well. Next slide, you can see this probably a little bit larger. Also, that what has changed, you can see in that site wall, the terrace area on the right. Further studies, we were a little bit high from the terrace to the sidewalk, so we were going to need to put in railing. So in order to avoid that, we did a raised terrace, planted terrace area there, so we have that proper step down and to avoid the doing railings at that area. Next slide, please. A good view. Again, you can see that nothing has changed in the overall design there. Next slide. And continue to go through there. You can see one of the blade signs in this perspective here. We are suggesting 2 blade signs and 1 monumental sign, since we do have 3 street frontages. So we wanted to have a sign for each of those streets. Next slide, please. The view from the bridge as you come into town from West Ashley. Again, you can see that second blade sign for the Cannon Street, placed a little bit higher off on the building there, so you could see it as you come over the bridge. Next slide. You can continue. Next slide. This is the lower entry, kind of as you come from James Allen or downtown off of Lockwood. Next slide there. You can see, again, the renderings or the design has not changed. The renderings pretty much speak for themselves in that. You will get a glimpse of the roof terrace on the bar on the outside there, which is a wood look aluminum material, and then the glass railing again at that height. Next slide, please. This is where that first comment of the BA from the staff came from, of the louvers. So you can see how the intake for that generator room would be on that right one. That's correct. And then the exhaust will be on the south side, right around the corner from there. Next slide, please. The only other thing that's been updated, you will see in the upper next couple slides as well, is the light fixture has been selected for the sconce, the wall sconce. So that is a slightly different look than what was in the renderings previously. That has been a selected fixture there. Next slide. Again, that entry there, you can see the canopies have been updated, slightly thicker to obviously get the cantilever that we were looking for. The storefronts, several ground floor storefronts have been updated. You'll see a little bit thicker mullions on the second floor of those storefronts. And that is to support the awning windows. Working with the window manufacturer, we needed some stronger verticals for that. Next slide. The bollards also have been updated here. We originally had kind of square bollards, but we elected to go with a round, since these will be placed around a curve. In order to try to get a square one always kind of perpendicular or on tangent to that curve would be very difficult. We elected to go with a round, softer approach there. Next slide. And then again, that view from Cannon Street. Next slide. You'll see a little bit larger. You may have to zoom in there, but you can see the monumental sign and what we're suggesting there in the rendering. We'll have a sheet just for the signage as well, but it's on that southeast corner. And if you could jump to slide 39. So these are elevations, but we'll kind of look at the enlarged elevations to give you more of an idea. Should be one more. Yep, thank you. So here's your typical bay around the tower element there. Again, the windows are set back. The pilasters, we're saying +12, and that's from the edge of slab. And the spandrels at each level are +8. So obviously the pilaster A is 4 inches proud of that. And the glazing is actually set back 8 inches from the face of that spandrel. And we'll see those in the details. But so it is a very deep set window. The horizontals there, I'll let you slide back. There you go. You can stay on this one. That's fine too. Perfect. So you can see how the spandrels do alternate from the metal and the brick. Obviously at the brick spandrels, it'll be straight up brick. At the metal spandrels, the alternate ones, this is part of the window system itself. So it's pretty much a sill extension that they can do to cap that slab edge. And this way we're not trying to use multiple trades in one tight little area. This will make it a little bit cleaner of an installation. And there you can see this is the west elevation here on the ground floor. If you scroll down just a bit, you'll see those 2-story entries set back about 3 feet from the face of the pilasters. And I do apologize. In the large elevations, the FRP panel underneath this window was updated. I'm not sure how this view got in here without them being updated, but we did break that knee wall down into 3 sections, 3 segments with a diamond in the center of each of those. So that has been updated. You would see that on the large elevations, the overall elevations when you look through the package. If you could jump to page 43, we can look at some of the detailing. So if you zoom in, say the number B2, just for instance, this is pilaster A on your typical level, where you can see how the, excuse me, the VTAC louver and decorative screen is integrated into the overall window system that's on the right side of that detail. And on the left side, obviously, is the clear glazing part of that window system. It is set back, as I said, 8 inches from the spandrel section, which is 4 inches back from the pilaster. So it is a very deep set window. We did return the brick back in these situations at all window jams, as suggested by the BAR. We also believe that is the best route to go. It did feel like it provides a deeper window set. There are jam extensions to each of these windows to help bridge that gap, and also create the 2-toned window design that we have, with the bronze being the perimeter and the verticals, and the champagne would be the inner glass or inner mullion trim. You scroll over to the one to the right of that, it's the same detail. It's just that pilaster B, where the pilaster is set in 2 inches from pilaster A. So it's essentially the same detail, just slightly different depths there. Feel free to scroll back out. I think we can go to page, look at my list here. I think 46. So yeah, keep going. Next slide. This one right here, or this one works too. So this is your typical spandrel details on the far right there. C5, A5 is the brick, and obviously the metal that's part of that window system. At the brick on A5, you'll see how the sill extension is again part of that window system to cover that gap. And then the one to the left of that is the same level, but at the curved corner, and you can see the FRP profile provided at that curved corner. If you can zoom back out. So A1 and A1 and C3 again are at the curved corner. Those are the various cornices to mimic what's happening at the brick section, just an FRP in those profiles. Next slide. I'll just briefly touch on these. This is your 11th floor. On the right is your 11th floor cornice, and then obviously, excuse me, on the left there is your roof cornice. All out of FRP at the top, and on the right side we'll have an FRP sill on top of that brick cornice, and that's repeated at level 4 as well. If you jump over to page 50, we'll look at the lower wing real quick. So here's your typical lower wing bay. Again, here, this is everything for seeing this as flat plate metal, as this detail. The only spot where we would have FRP on this low wing would be the top parapet. And that's just so we can get the profile and the returns at the reveals that we wanted. Trying to do that in metal panel just wasn't working for us. So that's all FRP. And since it's at a different plane, it's not coplanar with the metal, we think that the shadows and whatnot will kind of prevent any sort of materiality change that you may see, which I don't think you really will capture that. The ground floor, the columns there will be in a heavier gauge flat plate metal to be a little bit more durable from damage. Next slide, please. Keep going, I'm sorry. 52, I think, there you go. These are plan details. You can see, again, what we just saw in the elevations, the deep recess windows, which are about 9 inches back from the face-up pilasters. We do have, again, the stepping like we did at the tower, where your main pilaster and then your kind of window band surround is set back 4 inches from that. Next slide, please. Again, just section details. Again, looking at C3, we can look at is the FRP parapet. Again, this you can see is non-coplanar with the metal panel below it. And then the rest below would all be flat plate metal panel. We could jump 2 more slides, should be page 54. Here's canopy details, the curved canopy detail. Not much to note more than what we saw in the renderings. Obviously cantilevered, and we're handling all the drainage through birch mouths out the ends of those canopies. Maybe slide over 2 more sheets to 56. Again, you see the blade signs here, very simple in color. The main face would be bronze to match, and then the ends of those, the end kind of elevation of those blade signs would have the color that is associated with the hotel branding. And then at the monumental sign, we would have, since we had those low site walls around the building made out of the same brick that is the tower, we would just provide aluminum, kind of deep aluminum signage there that's on standoffs from that low wall, that seat wall that people could interact with. And the idea there is to have some uplighting within the concrete plinth to illuminate that sign. So we do welcome feedback on that for our signage submission. Next slide, please. And then just wanted to kind of show what we're thinking as far as mock-up panel. We believe we captured all the details, the majority of the typical details in these 2 mock-ups. We do see 2 separate ones, one for the tower and one for the low wing. Since they are slightly different, we just felt it'd be easier to make those as 2 separate mock-ups. Again, this will be a separate submission, but welcome your feedback. And I appreciate your time and look forward to hearing your comments.
Thank you. We'll not have any public comment on this agenda item. Mrs. Parrish, do we have any public comment on this one?
No, we don't. I just want to make sure that the applicant, who I had down for applicant was Jeffrey Ringring, Richard Gow, Nate Dittman, and Charles Quinn.
I apologize, and I do see that Mr. Dittman is at least on audio. We're a little over a 10-minute time limit, but if other gentlemen from the applicants or other persons for the applicant would like to speak, please feel free.
This is Nate with Remark. Jeffrey mentioned the items that we modified since the last submission. On the north side with the change in the benches, that was the main thing that we've changed and removed, I guess. But Jeffrey covered that briefly early on.
Okay. Anything else from the applicant?
No, sir. Thank you.
All right. Thank you. Ms. Parrish had noted before I got us out of order that there was no public comment on this item. So that means that we will move to city staff comments and recommendations.
Sure. And while we're pulling those up, I would just like to explain, and I probably should have caught mid application proposal, but once we assemble all of our slides and stuff, it's really hard to find a page number. So I just appreciate your patience when someone gives us a page number or something like that. It's just, they're not page numbers anymore sometimes. So it's a little bit slower for us to find them.
I'm impressed by your recall to get to what the applicant is.
Lawrence.
It is okay.
All right. Are you interested? I mean, the applicant did go over board comment, and that's pretty close to matching up with what we have for board comment. So if you'd like for me to read those, I can. The prior board motion was preliminary approval with board and staff comments. And so, and then today, staff comments number 1, in terms of its overall design, materials, and color palette, the project has changed very little from what was last submitted and approved at board preliminary review. Number 2, the louvers at the top floor continue to be visually bothersome, but may not be so much when built. Number 3, applicant has addressed all of staff and board comments adequately or has offered a satisfactory explanation for not doing so. Number 4, it is understood that while signage will be reviewed separately, board comments regarding the blade signs are noted. 5, flood panels are to have a button cap type cover colored to match adjacent material when the flood panel anchorage system is not in place. And 6, no options have been submitted for the decorative panel overlay on VTAC screens. Various options should be explored and presented to the board at mock-up review. And then the staff recommendation is final approval with board and staff comments and final review by staff.
Thank you, Mrs. Parrish. The applicant, their designee, now has an opportunity to briefly respond if they would care to do so. They certainly do not have to.
We don't really have much comments. I think number 5 about the button caps, we do anticipate having those button caps match the surrounding material, just like was stated there. And we're happy to explore the decorative panels on the mock-ups when we get to that point.
Okay. And it appears we're all on the same page regarding mock-ups and separate review of signage. Thank you. We will now move to a board discussion and potential vote on this agenda item. What do my fellow board members have to say about this agenda item?
I agree with staff's comments and recommendation.
Thank you.
I also agree with staff's comments and recommendations. I'd like to add that I do not support the blade sign.
Thank you, Mr. Metters. Further board comments?
This is Eddie Fava, and I think I saw it the very first time it came to the board, and it's progressed, I think, nicely. I think it's a very handsome building, and it's a location where you can get away with a little bit, something a little bit more different than what you could get in downtown proper. I think detail was beautiful. It was nicely presented. With regarding the signage, my only comment would be, as it progresses, I understand that may be a color that is requested by the company itself, Aloft Hotels, but it'd be nice if it was of the same palette of the building at the very least. It detracts a little bit from the handsomeness of the structure.
Thank you, Mr. Fava. Further board comments? I'll just add to that I have been pleased with how this particular project has progressed, the responsiveness of the applicant, their ability to work with staff. I too am confident that the aesthetic issues that they could not work around were largely engineered into the building, and there's only so much that can be done about that. And I also think that this is a great way of thinking about this building is it's a marquee building from a different entrance to the city. I think it's a much nicer entrance than the one we have now, and that it is, to use Mr. Fava's word, it is both handsome and dignified for its particular setting, something which this corridor will greatly benefit from, I think. So thank you again to the applicant in that regard. And I agree with city staff comments regarding both signage and the mock-up panels and the minor matters related to flood panels. It sounds like we're all on the same page there. Any further board comments, or do I have a motion from my fellow board members?
I'll introduce a motion for final approval with final review by staff, including board and staff comments.
Mr. White, your motion, as I understand it, is a motion for final approval with board and staff comments and final review by staff. Is that correct?
That's correct.
Okay. Is there a second to that motion?
I'm happy to second that, Mr. Chairman.
Thank you, Mr. Metters. We have a motion and a second. I'll therefore proceed to call the roll. Mr. White, how do you vote?
Yay in favor.
Mr. Fava?
Yay in favor.
Mr. Scott?
Yay in favor.
Mr. Metters?
Yay in favor.
And myself, yay in favor. It passes unanimously. Thank you to the applicant. All right, Mrs. Parrish, are you ready to proceed with agenda item number 3?
Let's go.
Okay.
Item number 3 is also 194 Cannon Street. This is a request for final approval for new construction of a parking garage with ground level retail associated with the adjacent 175 room hotel. Old City District, Heights District 85, 125. And again, we have the aerial context slide here. The parking garage will be, as you know, on the east part of the property, with the hotel on the west part of the property. And then we have the Wendy's again. The Wendy's. And you can see part of West Edge, part of the lot that's vacant. Looking east on Spring. We're going to run through previous staff comments on this one as well. And then just for, let's see. This one you actually first saw on June 10th, 2020. And then we saw it again on April 14th where it was deferred. And then on May 26th, May 12th, these were the previous staff comments from that meeting. The staff observations were some improvements over the conceptual submittal are noted, which include the addition of a base to the stair tower at the southwest corner, the addition of an opening on the south elevation of the stair tower, an increase to the height of the low walls behind the louvers in an effort to screen headlights, and the straightening of the retail bay frames. At the June 10th, 2020 meeting of the BARL, in which the parking garage earned conceptual approval, this is old news, but there was some discussion and indication that the garage might be treated as a separate project, which with potentially a different architectural language because the hotel design progressed separately. We do believe that these should be looked at once more in relation to one another as depicted in the applicant's most recent submittal renderings. And the staff comments of the day were: 1, consider how the parking garage and hotel relate to one another and consider incorporating some similar languages between the two. The starting base for the visual connection would be the similar masses of the stair element on the parking garage and the smaller element of the hotel. 2, provide refinement to the stair tower at the southwest corner. Study the colors of the internal elements of the tower and frame on the west elevation. This is the dominant element on the building and therefore the focal point. The view into the large opening of the stair element feels unrefined and utilitarian. 3, provide clarity on the sheen of the aluminum louvers and frames. They appear to be very reflective in the renderings. 4, while the fins will screen the view into the garage along the south elevation from a moving car, they do not successfully screen the view into the garage on the west elevation from a moving car from the bridge as evidenced on page A0101. At this location, the viewer is parallel to the fins and at a higher elevation. 5, consider the addition of other vertical elements to the base structure or framework of the garage to increase the vertical proportions of the overall appearance. 6, consider other methods for screening the solid wall at the north elevation. The vertical recesses are helpful and they do reflect the fins, but they are quite shallow. 7, while the retail is great for the ground floor, we would recommend considering what can be done to encourage the success of the retail establishments that would occupy the spaces facing Cannon Street, such as perceived from the street for any outdoor uses. And then the staff recommendation was deferral at the time. With staff and board comments. I think we may have just missed something. And so I'm going to give you the highlights from May 12th because this project came again on May 12th. And I'm sorry that's not in the notes, but if you unless you don't want to hear it, I'll just keep going.
No, please go ahead.
Okay. All right. So on May 12th, this was before the board again. And the staff comments, they're not too lengthy, but we clarified let's see, I'm going to read them. Number 1, as a point of clarification, staff does not consider the addition of vertical expansion joints to be an answer to adopted staff comment number 5 from April 14th, which read, consider the addition of other vertical elements to the base structure or framework of the garage to increase the vertical proportions of the overall appearance. This referenced the underlying structural framework of the parking garage or the structure minus the fins rather than the ground plane. Staff believes that the applicant's response may address a similar investigation. However, for clarification, this comment was an effort to break up the horizontal expanse or span of the fins, and this has not occurred. This concern is most evident in the opinion of staff from the southeast view angle as seen on page A104A. Number 2 was number 2, 3, 4, and 5 were comments about the green wall, which were not adopted. And so I'm not going to read those. Number 6, these were adopted comments. Regarding the mural for the north elevation, confirm the portions of the mural which are white in the presentation will be the stucco color that is proposed in the color palette on page A0201. 7, regarding the mural, if the design is not finalized, consider what about this building is Charleston specific and whether the art could be more place specific or how this wall could better relate to the other walls which have a more muted palette. Number 8, Regarding the wayfinding graphics in the stair tower, while interesting, the interplay of words and numbers seems a bit confusing and should be simplified or each resized. And the staff recommendation that night was, based on the board's prior acceptance and approval of the general architectural language, staff recommended preliminary approval with board and staff comments. And then some of the board comments were, is the screen wall timeless or just hiding a parking garage? The north wall is not successful to me personally and should be resolved at board level. I'm concerned about the success of the green wall. The color palette of the mural needs to be muted and needs to speak more to place and context. Louvers are a concern. Comfortable with staff recommendations regarding the mural and other items. In support of most of staff comments, the green wall is challenging. The mural could become a competition among local artists. Louver corner needs to be looked at again, and agree with staff and board comments. And then your motion was preliminary approval with board comments and staff comments, except for the ones I didn't read.
Okay.
Is there any need for clarification on those?
I think we're fine. That was a good refresher. I'm glad you went through it.
Okay, good. And then we are going to have, I believe, Nate Dittman and Jeffrey Ringering and Charles Quinn and Richard Gower listed as speakers.
Very good. Gentlemen, you have the floor.
All right, thank you. Again, this is Jeffrey Rendering with LS3P. If you can advance to the next slide. So again, I think as you heard, most of the comments were relating to the mural on the north wall. We did restudy the mural a bit and have attempted to mute the colors more to be in line with the rest of the building. Again, what you will see on the screen varies. Obviously, every screen reads a little bit differently. So please keep that in mind when you see the colors. That's your, and then the other comment, the other major comment was about board comment number 4. I have there the southeast corner of the louver or the fins on the garage. And that corner has been studied a bit more, and you'll see that in the updated renderings. So we can advance to slide 4. Look at the site plan. You'll see a couple of small changes to the site plan. Again, these were from TRC comments. On the right side there, if you go to the next slide, you'll see a little bit larger. That the new driveway or the extension of Haygood, we did have a secondary sidewalk that was placed at that road temporarily. Obviously, when the city takes that driveway and widens it, that will be removed. But that was a request by TRC to provide that. The rest of the site plan is mainly stayed intact. If you go to slide 9, about 4 more slides here. Again, walk through lighting. Again, we were trying to keep the lighting kind of low to the paths really, and just kind of provide some general illuminance on the south side there at the retail zone. So you'll see that same garden path light that was used on the hotel side brought over to the garage side. And then with the retail spaces being illuminated, that will provide enough lights on that retail plaza on the south side. You can advance 2 more slides. So here you see the comparisons of the 2 buildings again. The main change, if you want to go to the next slide, see a little bit larger, was the brick parapet of that southwest stair was brought up just a bit more to conceal mechanical equipment that's above there for the elevator there. So that parapet's slightly higher than it was before. Next slide. You can see that here as well. And if you go to the next slide, you'll see the header of that stair opening has been changed. We do have some shoulder courses there, and that is due to the fact that we wanted to return the brick at that opening and not make it feel such a flat facade. So we do have a brick soffit there. We'll see in the details. That goes back about 4 courses before we switch into a deep stucco kind of soffit beyond that. Linear lighting will kind of trace around the perimeter on the north side and the back of that stairway to help illuminate, obviously help illuminate the staircase, but also the graphics on the back wall. Next slide, please. I think here again, you'll see that the fins on the west have been rotated. The stair graphics have been updated a bit. to be a little bit more muted and palette to be resized. But general, the concept stays intact from the previous round. And this is really, we feel like it provides a playful nature as you kind of climb these stairs. Once you reach the level, you'll actually be able to read the words. And I think that was part of the nature that from afar, you really won't see them due to the stair design itself. It'll kind of block most of it, but it also draws the person into the space. Next slide, please. Same renderings again, you see the brick parapet slightly taller, but overall, the building has stayed the same. Next slide. I did notice in her previous renderings that our columns were missing, so those are now appearing between the fins. You can see that column, which helps that verticality read a little bit stronger. That probably was missing before. Next slide, please. Again, so that this is the southeast corner that we looked at, that the fins and how they turn the corner. On the top side, you'll see that the south fins actually cantilever beyond the ends of each wall as they're wrapped around the building. We agreed with the board comments that it would kind of feel unresolved, maybe especially as you would see it from the back side of those fins. So now the fins actually end at the wall in a mesian-like corner. We did not provide a fin at that 45-degree angle, mainly because it would feel disconnected from the rest. This way, it does feel like the fins are rotating and wrapping around the building.
And Jeffrey, this is Nate speaking
Yep.
from Remark. I'll just add that on the south side, we do have more canopy trees going in what will be the depressed rain garden area. So that'll be another layer between the road and the pedestrian environment. I just wanted to add that.
Yep. Thank you, Nate. Appreciate that. Next slide, please. I see that a little bit larger, that mesian corner there, how the two louver groupings kind of butt up against each other. Next slide. Here you'll start to see that mural. Again, the colors will read differently on every screen, but they are muted more in the Charleston color schemes. We'll look at what the graphic actually is in a couple slides later, but just to start showing that visual. Next slide, please. So what you see is quote unquote white would be that stucco color. It's not really quite white. It's an off-white, it's a cream color that matches the brick on the hotel. Next slide, please. See that from afar. You can continue to slide through. Next slide, please. And as you approach from the Haygood here, you get a little glimpse of that mural as well. Next slide. And should be the next one. So here's kind of the breakdown of what the mural and all the three images. So the graphic was derived, as you can see in the background of that graphic, a map of the area. On the left side there is, if I can point with my mouse, on the left side of that graphic is actually the site on the far left where you see the big T. So if you keep going to the left, but this is Spring Street and Haygood wrapping through. And then the letters are actually broken down of all the neighborhoods that are surrounding our site. So Gadsden Creek and USC, West Edge and Western, West Side, I'm sorry. So those letters are broken down and distracted, obviously, throughout the graphic. And again, this is to entice people to interact with it each day. If it was a static image, I think as you drove past each day, you would kind of keep seeing the same thing and you begin to stop looking at it and engaging with it and be waiting for something fresh and new. This graphic allows the kind of the pedestrian to see it in a different way. Each way they approach the site each day, they might see it or read it differently. They might eventually make out that it is a map and they can find their house where they're located at. So it kind of creates a little bit more intrigue. Let's see here. Next slide. Just looking at the elevations, I think we can kind of jump through these to the details, but I wanted to point out that we did have an exterior material palette legend that's kind of called out there at the bottom. These are materials that you've seen throughout the renderings, and nothing really has changed there. So if you could jump to slide 35. I got my numbers right here. I'm gonna look at some of the details real quick. One more, I think. Perfect. So the detail in the top left corner, we can start there, D1. This is looking, again, obviously at the fin connection back to the slab edge. We elected to kind of overhang that channel that will support the fins below the slab edge. As I'm sure we're all aware, that slab edge will not be perfect and straight. And so this will kind of create a nice clean line datum at each opening.
Sorry, I am way off here. Jeff.
Sorry, Lauren. Computer doesn't make it easy on you, I know. So A1 is looking at the detail, kind of at level 2, and how the retail entry is going to be designed there. And so that is an FRP, continuous FRP wrap. And FRP material allows us to kind of have a seamless signage band instead of having seams every so often if it was metal. And then at the second floor there, the stucco will return, pick up again, but below the fin connection and wrap underneath that soffit panel, the soffit of the concrete. A3 again is looking at the header of that stair opening, the southwest stair opening where the brick is, and just showing how we will have that brick soffit and then returning into a Diefs. And then on the right side there, you'll see all the aluminum plate openings that are kind of found throughout, kind of more of the back of house openings in the wall and the doors. Those will be aluminum plate in lieu of the FRP. And if you skip on down to page 38, 3 more slides here. Just want to again show the mock-up. If there is any comments on that, we welcome them. This will be a separate submission, but just trying to capture all the different scenarios on the building, all the details at this one. And that's it. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Do we have any public comment, Mrs. Parrish?
No, sir, we do not.
Let's move to city staff comments and recommendations.
We do have those. Okay. Some of these I think may have already been addressed, but I will be going through them. Staff comment number 1. I'm going to start reading because we'll have it up in just a moment. But staff comment number 1, previous staff comment number 1 from May 12th, which was adopted and which clarified staff comment number 5 from April 14th, has not been addressed. The response for this comment was no comment. The comment was an effort to break up the horizontal expanses or spans of the fence. At this point, the board should determine if they are okay with the continuous expanses of the fence as proposed. And number 2, previous staff comment number 7 and board discussion from May 12th, which were adopted, encouraged the consideration of implementing more place-specific art for the north wall or relating the north wall to the other elevations of this building. While the art has been muted in color, the board should determine if the direction of the art is approved. The art relates to the graphics found within the stair tower, but these are not place-specific. Staff is open to either direction. It was also contemplated that a competition among local artists may be a way of deciding a mural design. Number 3, previous board comment included the direction to restudy the treatment of the fins at the southeast corner. Previously, the fins on the south side overlapped the fins on the east side. Currently, as proposed, the fins on both the east and south walls are stopped just shy of the corner, and the stucco corner is exposed. Staff finds this to be more successful than the previous version. Board discussion of May 12th indicated the fins turning the corner with the potential to place 1 or 2 on an angle. Board should discuss the revised intersection and whether previous concerns have been addressed. Number 4, section A3 on page A3501 is a section through the storefront recesses. This section indicates a ceiling within the recess. The enlarged details A1 on page A3551 and B5 on page A3552 do not show the presence of a ceiling at this location. Please confirm the treatment for this location and its finish. Number 5, considering the pedestrian route between the hotel and the parking garage, deepen the sidewalk at the south end of the park to coordinate with the retail hardscaping. This treatment would be similar to the enlarged hardscaping areas on the corner with the hotel. Number 6, fins and other metal elements shall have a high performance finish and if possible shall be factory applied. Number 7, Flood panels are to have a button cap type cover colored to match adjacent material when the flood panel anchorage system is not in place. And staff recommendation, based on prior acceptance of architectural direction, staff recommends final approval with final review by staff of 4 permit drawings. It is noted that mock-up sample panel drawings package and a signage package will be reviewed separately.
Okay.
Thank you.
Any response from the applicant?
Yes, please. If you could go back one slide just so I can look at the comment, but yeah, number 4, just to confirm the treatment of that location. So I do apologize, the detail cut that off. A1 on 35551, which is at the retail entry, will have a porcelain tile ceiling, which will match the walls and the floor. So that same treatment, it's 2 different tiles that will be in herringbone pattern, kind of pixelated through that area. We'll wrap all the way around those entries. And then at the aluminum plate panel recess, those ceilings will be deeps, just like the walls are stucco. That same material will wrap all the way around. And then if you go to the next slide, I think number 6 maybe. So number 6, those will have a high performance finish. They will be factory applied. We've been working with the fabricator on that and really going into the details. So the way we have it detailed allows the finish to be factory applied and then bolted on site. That just makes it easier that way. So we were able to accomplish that. Thank you.
Thank you. We'll now move to board discussion and a potential vote on this agenda item. What do my fellow board members have to say about this project?
I have a question, if I may. This is Eddie Fava, but in reference to the panels for the mural on the north side, and I may have missed that, but what's the material there on, if I may ask that of the applicant?
Sure.
Yep. So the material behind or that the murals apply to is stucco.
Okay, so it's painted on a stucco wall?
That's correct. It's stucco, direct applied stucco on block, and then the mural will be painted onto that.
Gotcha. Okay, thank you. Well, I'll mention my comments. As I said, I think I saw this early on, but I think the whole assembly of it, again, is quite handsome, and it's in an area that can handle it. I applaud the improvements. I do have a question about regarding the stair tower and the graphics and looking at that again. I think that's a nice view when you're coming from West Ashley, and that to the applicant's point, it is removed enough that I don't think that the graphics beyond are distracting, and are more focused to the people that are in the tower themselves. The corner fins, again, sorry if I may, but one question for the applicant. The horizontal members that support them, are those able to stop at the fin so that corner is expressed, or am I reading that properly in the drawing that horizontal element goes all the way to the corner of the I guess wall that it's mounted on?
Sure. So the channel that's supporting those fins will have to extend slightly beyond the last fin. So it has attachment on that side of that fin. So it can run all the way to the corner and be mitered, so it looks like a continuous track around the building. Or it could be stopped short. It just, we're kind of okay with either direction, but it will have to extend slightly beyond last fin.
Understood. Personally, I guess my comment, just as it is in board comment, would be, thank you for your response, would be that I think it's a little more successful if it stops short, because it almost looks like it's missing one. If it continues to the corner, I think it's nice that it kind of breaks the corner and then expresses itself. And then lastly, I know there's been discussion about the mural. So if I'm backtracking a little bit with respect to my fellow board members, I don't mean to, but in looking at and I've got that on my other screen right here, but I guess sheet 187 of the PDF, where it shows your preliminary submission and your final. Again, just to my eye, it felt like the darker was maybe a little more successful and worked better with the base of the building, and red as one rather than something separate above. But all in all, I think again it's well done, and I'll leave my comments at that.
Thank you, Mr. Fava. Other board member comments?
Mr. Chairman, I'll take a run at it. I still feel that the southeast corner louvers are not resolved. It looks as if there's a it just fell short. And it looks like something's been left out on those corners in terms of the louvers. It's almost as if we're going to leave that corner exposed, then stop the louvers, maybe one louver even shorter than it is right now. And but I still can't quite understand why we can't include a corner that extends from the corner of the parking garage out that finishes the corner. It feels unfinished to me. And that also, when I was looking at the mural, and frankly, kind of looking away from the mural, I noticed that you see the same thing, the wide open end of the panels at the northeast corner, and which leaves an open corner for me, just looking down behind the louvers. In the mural, I understood what was being said about the mural, but I keep having this flashback to the backside of the tech center, where you've just got this panel, and I don't really. When I looked at the application and the proposed mural and the previous mural, I'm glad you brought that up, Eddie. The previous mural, I can't see how, if I'm walking up Haygood Street and I see that, how is that fitting in? You know, and I realized that there's been a lot of study and thought going into it, but I don't see how it fits in there, and I think that should deserve some additional study, because for a while, until the building's built there, that's going to be an important wall. And that's all I have. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Metters. Other board member comments? I'll jump in. I will say that I think that the mural is an improvement to the extent that a local tie-in has been articulated, and I'm not opposed to the map concept. I'll join Mr. Fava. One of the difficulties of this board is we're not supposed to be prescriptive, dictate what it should look like, only comment on what we have. What I would say, and what Mr. Fava said, was that I feel that this color palette for the mural is in fact off. I appreciate the fact that the applicant did what we were trying to guide him to do and having a more muted color palette, but I agree with Mr. Fava. I think it's less successful in this form. I don't know what's to be done about that other than to say, I don't think that it is quite there. I also want to join in Mr. Metter's comments, which are supported by Mr. Fava substituting in at this time, something that the board has commented on extensively and staff has noted, which is that there is a lack of a finished feel to the corners where we have this louvering system. We basically, tell me if the board disagrees with me in this statement, but we've agreed to a ribbon allowing these louvers all the way across one facade uninterrupted, but then at the corners, it does feel like something's missing in the gap, especially with the way that the louvers are angled, and you'll be able to see that on different elevations, and it just seems like there's a gap there, to quote Mr. Metters, I think. And so I think that does need to be resolved somehow. Mrs. Parrish said the board needed to confirm or move away from whether we were allowing these louvers to be broken up and whether we were okay with them being ribbon, words to that effect. My suggestion would be I'm okay with them being unbroken across a facade, but something does need to be done at the corners to give them a more finished look. And so I'll stand by Mr. Fava and Mr. Metters, so long as they don't think that I'm mischaracterizing their remarks in that regard. Other than that, I think that it's successful. I'm not too worried about the storefront facades, and I do feel that the applicant has addressed the concerns that we had there. Other board member comments?
This is Leon Scott. I'm comfortable with staff recommendation. I think this project has moved forward well and has made the improvements. That's it.
So, Mr. Chairman, I got one more comment. I don't really know, and I'm looking for help from y'all. The mural is one of the two long sides of the building. So, I mean, it's a big deal. The unfinished corners are a big deal to me. The balance of the project, I think, is great. And so I'm in a tough situation because I don't know how to give that, or if it's appropriate to give that volume, even though it's only 2 items. It's a big deal to give back to staff. I'm throwing that out for conversation, but I'm struggling with that because the rest of the building, I think, is fine.
Yeah, I'm right there with you, Mr. Meadows. Other board comments, or if it is perfectly appropriate if Mrs. Parrish, Mr. Courtney would like to speak to whether they feel that is within the scope of staff review. That's fine. If they don't want to speak to it, that's okay too. We can figure this out.
Sure. Simply put, the mural will come back to the board in the future for a separate review.
Okay.
Yeah,
And
and
that is both as to the design and the color palette.
Yes.
Okay.
yeah, it'll be its own application. And, I've been sort of quiet on this one, but I would say that James remembering what happened with the west facade of the tech center garage, that's a pretty pertinent example of what can go wrong with a precast concrete parking garage on 0 lot line condition. But the reason we ended up there was partly because the design team and the client chickened out on the mural and went with a pattern on concrete instead, which was not successful. Now that's a much bigger facade than what we're talking about here. That particular facade is larger than a football field.
Right. It's huge.
This was a good bit smaller, thankfully. I think, we don't often at this board wrestle with murals as much as we once did before the board was split into two bodies. But they are their own thing. And I actually think that there's promise in what they're working on right now. And when that comes back later as a standalone application, I'm sure it can be resolved. But, certainly we don't want to get the applicant feeling that we would prefer that there not be a mural at all, because there's no way around that big blank wall otherwise.
I totally agree, Mr. White.
Nature of the beast.
Yeah, I totally agree with that, Mr. White. And thanks to Lawrence's clarification, I think Mr. Meadows would agree. We're kind of bifurcating that issue off. That's a mural's good here. We don't want a plain wall. We can work with the applicant on that, which leaves the drop back consideration, which Mr. Meadows, I believe Mr. Pavin shared, which is the issue of these corners around the louvers. And we can discuss whatever, but if board members have comments on that, and or staff wanted to comment on the propriety or the comfort level with working with the applicant on that, or whether that's a hard decision this board needs to make.
Mr. Chairman, I gotta say Jay's right on, and we are basically getting to the same sheet of music. But we approve this building. We don't approve this building today. We are pushing down the road that one long side that's going to be very visible, and the project gets finished and we're still talking about what that mural is going to be. I'm in favor of mural. If I hadn't said that, I am in favor of mural. I did not think a green wall was going to be successful there. There are other alternatives. They're just not part of the plan. And I think it's great because one day that wall is going to be covered up by another big building. But during this interim time, I mean, it needs to be as good as the rest of the building. And again, I'm still struggling with how to deal with that.
I asked a question.
Yes,
sorry. Is it correct that what I just heard, that mural is going to come back for review and approval before it's done regardless?
Yes.
Correct.
And if that's the case, is the board not comfortable with, if we elect to move forward with it, knowing that, nothing's going to go up there until it's reviewed again and approved by
That's right. I think we are agreeing on it. We had to get our heads there, and we also need
Right.
to clarify to the applicant, even though it's kind of precatory, that, yes, we want a mural on this facade. No, we're not there right now on what it's finally going to look like, but we're getting there. And a mural is preferential, far preferential to a blank wall or a failed green wall. I think I think we probably made that abundantly clear to the applicants, but if not, I think that's a statement of this board.
Okay. And I'm going to address, if you don't mind, Mr. Chairman, again, the corner, because I do feel like and perhaps even the applicant struggling with it a little bit, looking at the preliminary submission and the current submission, it's just unresolved. And it either looks like something there's not a piece that fits it properly and it's trying to be forced, or one fell off. So it just seems like it needs to be more of a deliberate solution. And when I was suggesting pulling it back, perhaps it pulls back even further, where it's very clear that it's deliberate, because it looks right now that it was just a near miss and it may be an accident, not intentional. I think
that's right. I think that's very well stated, Mr. Favor, is that it either needs to be very clear that it is deliberate in its coursing by having some more separation there, or in the alternative, there needs to be a finished piece. I think
correct, that it's a clear transition all the way across, and it's one of those two would be, in my opinion, acceptable.
Okay. Further board comment? Hearing none, is there a motion from the board?
I'll take a stab at it. A motion for final approval with board and staff comments, understanding that the north wall mural will have to be resubmitted, reviewed, and approved prior to it being finalized.
Okay.
And the louvered corners resolution acceptable to staff per board comments.
One moment, Mr. Favor.
Yes, sir. Sorry, rather lengthy.
No, that's a great motion. I can't. I can do a lot of things. I can't write that fast. So, Mr. Favor, your motion, as I understand it, is for final approval with board and staff comments incorporated as to the north wall mural. It is understood that the north wall mural would be resubmitted for separate approval at a later date, and that additionally the issue of the corners of the louvered surfaces are to incorporate these board and staff comments and be acceptable to staff.
Yes, sir, that's correct.
Is there a second to that motion?
I'll second that.
Okay. Mr. Favor has made the motion. Mr. White has seconded. I will therefore proceed to call the roll. Mr. Scott, how do you vote on this motion?
Yay in favor?
Mr. Metters?
Yay in favor.
Mr. White?
Yay in favor.
Mr. Favor?
Yay in favor.
And myself, yay in favor. Thank you to the applicant and thank you to staff for working on the issues that we were able to narrow this down to. And I feel sure after that little colloquy we just had that the applicant understands that we do desire a mural on that north facade, and we will work with them to get it right. Thank you.
Thank you.
Also, congratulations.
Thank you all. Thank you.
Thank you. Mrs. Parrish, agenda item number 4 has been, which was to be 250 Spring Street, approval for a hotel has been withdrawn by the applicant.
That's correct.
Okay.
So we'll move on.
Agenda item number 5.
Okay, agenda item number 5 is 609 King Street. Requests for final approval for complete demolition of a structure. The architectural rating is 0. It's in the Cannon Elliott Borough neighborhood. Building was constructed between 1925 and 1935, and it sits within the old and historic district. Giving you some context here, we have an aerial view of the building in the red rectangle. King Street is just to the east of the building, and Columbus Street is the intersection. This is the front elevation of the building as taken from the intersection of Columbus and King. And then another image from that intersection. This is a view looking south on King with Hoffler Place on your right and U-Haul on your left. And this photograph is from more so of the project and looking northeast, and that is the Evening Post building in the view there. And this is one of the architectural survey cards that we have on file. It is from 1974. I said that, and I just want to make sure it's from 1974. This is a photograph from the time with a little bit more information. You can see at the time there was a pawn shop, and it was Taylor's Pawn Shop. I mean, this gives a little bit of description about the building and what its makeup is. Oh, okay. I'm so sorry. It was 1985. The survey card was from 85.
85. Okay.
That explains the cars. And if you need any more time with the card, let me know. We can go back. This application was before you on May 26th. It was the same request for approval of demolition, and I'm going to go over our previous staff comments from that day. A staff observation: no one enjoys reviewing a demolition request, especially for one of a building that seems intact and salvageable. This has been a tough decision for staff, and we acknowledge that this may be a tough decision for the board. In reviewing an application for demolition, we reference Ordinance Section 54-240, Article B, which states, in reviewing an application to demolish or demolish in part or remove or alter the exterior architectural appearance of any existing structure, the Board of Architectural Review shall consider, among other things, the historic, architectural, and aesthetic features of such structure, the nature and character of the surrounding area, the historic or culturally important use of such structure, and the importance to the city. Historically, the board has voted to incorporate historical properties or parts thereof into the forthcoming larger project. And then we had some staff comments that night where we were kind of addressing the ordinance sections. Number one, regarding the historic, architectural, and aesthetic features of the structure, the building is characterized with an Art Deco theme. This theme is represented as a front facade treatment only and is simple in nature. There are more refined examples within the city. It is unclear how much of the treatment is original and how much may have been added as part of a later alteration. Number two, regarding the nature and character of the surrounding area, the existing is a single-story building in an area of multi-story buildings, and therefore this structure is no longer representing the greater context. Its size and scale are out of character with this portion of King Street. Number three, regarding any historic or culturally important use of this structure, the research within the historical report presented by the applicant indicates the businesses that occupy the building seem to be indicative of King Street businesses throughout the years. There's little information presented or uncovered at this time that can clearly illustrate any important cultural significance. The building is believed to have been designed by Charleston architect Stephen Thomas, yet his designs were typically colonial revivals. Additional research is needed to determine what, if any, cultural significance this building represents. And number four, regarding the importance to the city, this property sits at the terminus of Columbus Street. The building does not evoke an axial view as is existent in many other locations throughout the district. Demolition would provide a positive opportunity to address the street terminus. And our staff recommendation on May 26 was deferral for further research into cultural significance and notability of the architect, as well as the unique style of this building on King Street and in Charleston. The application was withdrawn by the applicant after public comment, staff comments, and staff recommendation to defer the voting component after additional research could be made and meetings with the advocacy groups could occur. All right, and with this application, I believe we have a few speakers. I'm going to list them and then I'll make them panelists if needed. Richard Gow, Scott Parker, and David Empson.
The applicants have the floor at this time. Who would like to speak first for them?
Okay, I just found Richard.
Scott Parker will speak first.
Okay.
Mr. Parker.
Mr. Gao, can you hear us?
I can hear you.
Okay. I think I've made all three of those. I've unmuted all three of you.
Mr. Parker, can you hear us? Are you unmuted?
I'm going to promote Mr. Parker to panelist, and that may square away his sound issues.
Okay, can you all hear me now?
We can now.
Sorry.
That's
Good
okay.
evening. So my name is Scott Parker, and I'm with Design Works located at 302 King Street in Charleston. And I come before you this evening representing Evening Post Industries. I've had the privilege to be involved in the master planning, urban design, and landscape architecture for their 12.4 acre property on Upper King and Meeting Streets. The Evening Post families have and continue to be great champions of historic preservation. This includes the preservation and restoration of many properties throughout our city. It includes advocating for preservation via the newspaper and advocating for sensitive design and construction, both through the School of the Building Arts and as evidenced in the completion of the first phase of Courier Square at Meeting and Columbus Streets. With this long-standing legacy, I assure you, the Evening Post families believe the request before you this evening is justified. My work with the Evening Post spans over 10 years and includes 2 administrations and 4 city planning directors. Throughout the 10 years, we have engaged numerous times with our surrounding neighborhoods, with city officials, and with the preservation community. We have enjoyed significant support from all. Not once during these engagements did we hear any concern about preserving the building at 609 King Street. It was not until we submitted the request for demolition several months ago that we heard any concern at all. Perhaps one of the reasons we heard nothing previously is that the building is not even included in Jonathan Poston's book, The Buildings of Charleston, considered the go-to resource for preservation in Charleston, and that the city's architectural inventory did not include the building in the survey conducted in 1974, and it did include the building in the survey of 1985 and gave it a rating of 0. Tori has reviewed with you the language that guides how you make your considerations. And Rich Gao in a moment will take you through the facts associated with each of these considerations. To address cultural importance, I offer the following. During one period of our history, Upper King was occupied primarily by ethnic merchants providing goods and services to the surrounding ethnic neighborhoods. We know that our built environments change and evolve in response to cultural, economic, and natural forces. The best environments reveal the history of the place. They tell the story of the cultural past and reveal the forces that shape the environment. In this district of Charleston, there are many histories that can be revealed. We have considered how best to tell the whole story. We offer that the relocated Rogers Alley, a significant new addition to the public realm of Charleston that will be revealed in the application next before you, offers the best opportunity to tell the complete story of this place in our city, not the retention of this building. Rich will now take you through the facts for each of your considerations. Richard?
Yes. Thank
You're
you,
on.
Scott. Can you hear me?
Yes.
Thank you. I am Richard Gow with LS3P. Our office is at 205 and a half King. And we are with our clients, Evening Post Industries and Liberty Senior Living. And David Impson is a structural engineer with Britt Peters, who can address any questions about the structure. This submittal continues the submittal of May 17, when we withdrew the application in midstream because of things we had heard during the meeting that gave us pause to make sure we understood any cultural significance or architectural significance that was not covered in our research. That seemed like the fair thing to do. We have done that and conclude that even after research, this building is simply unremarkable. One-story suburban building that had come to King Street. Just to recap what we heard that day, we had heard that it was part of a contributing building to a new historic district, and our research determined that this district extends down to Bluestein's, and the tenant research on this particular building indicates nothing out of the ordinary or notable. This building was simply neighborhood retail. Second, we heard that Stephen Thomas was an important architect, and through our research, we found that Stephen Thomas was an architect during this period of time, but in looking at his work, it's arguable whether or not his body of work is important, or if this building was even remotely among his better buildings. He is not in any books, and many of his buildings are not important to the city. As Mr. Parker mentioned, the building is a zero in the city inventory. The third element that was brought up in that meeting was that this was one of only a handful of Art Deco buildings in the city along King Street, and the research proves otherwise. There are at least 15 buildings along King with some Art Deco influence that are much better, taller, and contribute to the streetscape that we aspire to. And this is a one-story building, I remind you. With that extra research, the landowner and the applicant are comfortable with asking the BAR to go forward to grant demolition. This presentation will be organized according to the ordinance that Tori mentioned. And we should just mention that saving buildings is not something that should be based on sentiment or desire to save buildings just because of their age. It should be based on that objective analysis. So could you go to the next slide, please? This is the building as seen from the south and the north. It shows the Hoffler Place adjacent to it in both photos. And it should be pointed out that when we designed with others the Hoffler Place, and it was reviewed by the board, there was absolutely no consideration during that process that this building at 609 King should be used as a generator or inspiration for design, height, scale, or mass. And you can see that it's on a mostly empty block surrounded by parking lots, and then across the street is the U-Haul building and the plant for the Post and Courier. This area has largely been industrializing and storage based for 50 years. And it's our hope that through demolition, we can return the site, the street, and the district to a high quality contributor of the city's fabric. Next, please. And then click to the next one after that. So historic features. This is an important slide because it shows two Sanborn mats on the upper left from 1888 and 1902. Both precede the building that's built there now, which is shown on the right. The two Sanborn maps on the left show the building that preceded it. It has 4 tenant spaces on 3 distinct properties with 0 lot line wood buildings. They weren't as deep originally as the current building, but the maps indicate that they were 2-story. And it is our understanding from reading the archive in the Post and Courier that this building had trouble with the health department. And so the tenants moved out, moved across the street. The owners tore down the buildings and expediently built another building back, which was 1-story with no residential above and much deeper, with 4 load-bearing walls and extra non-structural demising wall down the center bay, much like its predecessor. It's too bad the building was constructed out of cinder block and was all of 14 feet tall. If you look at the photograph on the bottom left, this is something we did not have in our prior submittal. And if you could enlarge it, it would be worth perusing. You can see, in our opinion, that when the building was first built, it did not fit the character of Charleston. It did not fit King Street. It was one story, expediently built with little decoration on the columns. You can see the right-hand bay signage panel was modified even as early as 1951. The prevailing character of the street was a rhythm of two-story buildings separated by one-story hyphens. And this building did not follow suit, and that's obvious that this building did not fit Charleston or King Street when it was first built. In effect, the architect brought the worst of suburban strip commercial architecture to one of the most important urban places in Charleston. And you can go back to the full screen now, because we're going to talk about the architectural inventory. And while Charleston does lack a purely definitive voice on demolition candidates, the one that we do have, the architectural inventory, shows on the bottom right of this slide that the building wasn't surveyed and it was given a 0 in 1986, a mere 49 years after it was built. We can go to the next slide, please. Architectural features, next. The plan in the center shows where the photographs are taken. And the plan in the center bottom shows that the building has 4 posts on the front that are made out of brick covered with stucco. The balance of the building is cinder block, the old kind. The condition is poor. The pictures speak for themselves. Next. This page features the recesses. Note that the right-hand bay was modified from the original. The flooring and glazing line was modified to be more shallow, probably due to the fact that the other two are a little bit deeper and a little bit less roomy. The one on the left does not meet the requirements of ADA. The feeling one gets when confronted with the 9-foot soffit height on King Street is compression, horizontality. These are not things that we do in the best of Charleston architecture. Next. This is the north side of the building. Next. These are images of the south side of the building along the current Rogers Alley. There is a stepped parapet with a terracotta tile cap. Those terracotta caps could be removed and restocked and donated to another project. Next. This is the King Street elevation, which you've seen. Next. And this is the western facade, which has been added to and subtracted from and added to again over and over the years as it's gone through its life as a storage and industrial building. Next. This shows the interior condition being poor to average for a building of this age. The materials are unremarkable, the detailing is unremarkable, and as the structural report points out, every component of this building would have to be upgraded if the building were to be reused. In summary, including the roof, the building really has 5 sides, and all of the sides have been modified from their original condition in some fashion other than the north wall. And we have to mention that, you know, as one of the historic tests being of a building has it been modified? And this building has had many changes, so we believe it is severely compromised in its historical integrity. Next slide, please. This has a summary of the structural report, and it does not meet any current minimum for life safety. The walls are unreinforced cinder block, which is weaker and softer than CMU. They would need extensive layering of steel and shotcrete or piers to retain them, further reducing the already narrow retail bays. The plan has been modified many times on the interior for the uses that have occurred here. The evidence of skylights that show up in the earlier aerial photograph is no longer because the roof was completely reframed and re-roofed. The structural report also indicates that the wood trusses would need to be reinforced. The front facade would need essentially concrete columns behind every brick pier, as a deep open front building would perform terribly in a seismic event. A new moment frame tying those piers together at each brick pier would need to be repointed and then doweled to those new frames. Even after all of that rehab, it would not handle a seismic event and would fail due to the poor foundation. Next slide, please. However, in deference to the preservation mindset, we have prepared these drawings since the last meeting to show exactly what the building looks like and how it is constructed. As a part of this process, we are prepared to do additional drawings if the board deems necessary to document the structure for posterity. Next slide, please. Again. The building has a 9-foot ceiling height. It's 80 feet deep. It's stucco, a material that's not easy to maintain or particularly revered by this board. This area just below the signage panel conceals the steel beam in a different material on each bay, and each component of the aluminum frame, glazing, and skirt all have to be completely replaced. Again, once we end up completely replacing all of these components to meet the code, and then trying to determine which year of its existence we should go back to, it would, absolutely not be the same building anymore, in our opinion. Slide 17. Next one, please. Much has been said about the Art Deco facade. Many buildings on King Street have Art Deco styling, and among the best are the Crest Building and the Riviera Theater, shining examples that historians from all over the country come to see. They populate many books as examples of Charleston's stout preservation process. Please note that in addition to excellent design and materials, these buildings have a height, scale, and mass that contribute to the street. You cannot say that is true of 609 King. Next slide, please. In the last meeting, some folks said that 609 King is one of only 4 Art Deco buildings left. As this slide depicts, there are multiple buildings with a lot of subtle moves on their facade with Art Deco influence, and most are 2-story buildings or taller 1-story buildings. Next slide, please. Another prong in the ordinance is the nature and character of the surrounding area. King Street is one of the most important streets in the city. Each building contributes to that unique texture of a shopping street. King Street has great proportions of buildings with height, with great building height to width of street. This is not a suburb. 609 King is a 1-story building in a 4-story height district. The building does not meet current VAR principles. It would not be allowed to be built today. And as this building is the terminus of Columbus Street, it's not representative of what the visitors and residents of Charleston expect to see at a district defining intersection. Next slide, please. This slide reminds us that King Street has multiple terminations along its length, and because it was one of the original streets of our city grid and the grids filled in after, it does not have a lot of through streets. It has many streets that dead end into it, and as such, it's very unique, and the character of the street is defined in part by how these buildings terminate your vista. Almost without variation, vista terminating buildings in Charleston are very handsome and represent the best of our city. The image in the upper left also reminds us that just a few short years ago, the design division of the city was hoping that the city of Charleston could build a 2-acre park where U-Haul and the alley sites are currently located, creating a new district center. This is our city planner saying that as a district, we want to reimagine it with the best potential for Charleston. It's clear that this district is rapidly changing, and if this building is allowed to remain, it will simply look like a sad holdout, and we believe that the city is better than that. Next slide, please. The way Broad Street is terminated by the Exchange Building on its east end is an example that we should follow or aspire to. It's not that we need a cupola to define a district. It's just that if the existing building at 609 King looked or felt like the building on the right, with soaring retail glazing, outstanding detailing, and something that made it proud, even privileged to be on King Street, we wouldn't be having this conversation. This owner would save that building. Next, please. And as we said, at the direction of the city, and we had a report prepared by BVL, and the document is in the materials. This image from that report is a timeline of use and occupancy by retail bay, 609, 611, 6.5, and 613. Each line represents a year, and you can see the tenants, where they were, when they were there, and then the vacancies between their occupancy. You can see that there were only a handful of tenants in these bays and there were many years of vacancy. But let me point out that this was only half the life of the building, because if you get to the bottom, you see that we go by decades. And the building was largely storage and vacant since 1973, almost or probably half of its life. And the reason that retailers did not want to be in this building is because it was substandard for Charleston retail tenant expectations in the height and proportions of the retail spaces. Because the last meeting uncovered that there have been many cultural uses important to the city, we want to point out that for 2 of the years through that research, we determined were Jewish inhabitants in 611 King out of what is over 330 tenant years. There were also many Greek, Baptist, Turkish, Black, Baptist, and other ethnicities included, and much like any of the other structures that are included in this district up and down King. None of these businesses appears to be specifically historic, notable, or important to the city. This is not to say that neighborhood retail is not an important use. It is. But the idea of the district is much more important than this building. This building is unremarkable and should not stand for that rich history. It's too substandard and no different than any strip retail building. It could be anywhere. Last couple of slides. Thank you for your patience. Next. And in the last meeting, we learned that there was an architect in Charleston named Stephen Thomas. He's not in any of the books that are written about Charleston architecture. He's not in any new thesis studies that we know of. And the buildings that he designed are not necessarily remarkable. He was primarily a residential architect who happened to work on a few commercial and institutional buildings. This site is not important because of the architect, and his body of work are not important to the city. I thank you for letting us complete our research and come back to you to demonstrate that this building does not have historic, aesthetic, cultural, or other significant features that would make it important to the city. And for all the reasons presented, we feel like the board has sufficient information to allow for this building's demolition. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Gow. Thank you for that very thorough and detailed presentation. Glad to extend time on that when it's so well done. Mrs. Parrish, do we have public comment? I know the answer to that. We have a fair amount of it. Let me pull up my spreadsheet.
I'm going to start unmuting some folks here while you get the sheet pulled up.
Thank you.
Let's start with Marion Hawkins. Marion?
Yes, thank you, Tori.
Floor's yours.
Mr. Chairman and board members, my name is Marion Hawkins. I'm president of the Canberra-Elliottboro Neighborhood Association. The applicant presented the project for 609 King Street along with requests for demolition at our March 1st neighborhood meeting. Our neighborhood greatly values our historic buildings as well as our rich cultural history. We take great care to evaluate requests for demolition, and notably, we rarely support an applicant for demolition. This building is not attractive, nor it is a good example of Art Deco architecture. This poor representation of the style doesn't fit the overall plans for Upper King Street. The project at 609 King Street will be a major focal point for the terminus of King Street at King, of Columbus Street at King, as well as a gateway in the city and the Canberra-Elliottboro neighborhood. During our conversations over the years regarding the plans for the site, the preservation of the building was not advocated nor given importance. In light of the greater good of the project, and especially since the building has no remarkable cultural or architectural value, we voted as a neighborhood association to support the applicant's request. We respectfully ask the board to grant the request. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Hawkins. And I did catch up to you, Mrs. Parrish. Who else do we have from the public?
We're gonna have Aaron Minigan speak next.
Okay.
Thank you. Erin Minigan with the Preservation Society of Charleston. The Preservation Society appreciates the applicant meeting with us and our dialogue throughout this process. However, we must urge the board to deny this request for full demolition based on the cultural significance, architectural value, and structural integrity of the building. The board is charged with reviewing demolition requests based on the qualities of the building alone and should not consider the forthcoming redevelopment proposal. So to the points in the ordinance regarding the building's historic and architectural features, character of the surrounding area, and culturally important uses, we put forth the following considerations. First, this building housed a series of immigrant and African-American owned businesses that contributed to a diverse and thriving commercial corridor in the early to mid 20th century, including a Chinese laundry, a Greek-owned restaurant, and a Black-owned barbershop, just to name a few. Neighborhood-scaled businesses like these are important to Charleston's history, as it provides a lens for modern understanding of the cultural and economic vibrancy of Upper King streetscape during this time. The historic tenants are highly representative of the melting pot of minority communities that established themselves and their businesses in this area and are often underrepresented in interpretation of Charleston's history. We feel it's important to preserve not only buildings of exceptional architecture, but also vernacular buildings like these in an effort to tell the full story and honor all past residents who helped shape the history of Charleston. Our built environment serves as a physical record of our past, and once a building is lost, we lose that strong connection and our best ability to convey the story and significance of a site. We also forgo opportunities for new neighborhood serving businesses to continue that story and occupy spaces that provide connection to the city's heritage. We also dispute the representation that this architecture is insignificant and that its condition warrants demolition. This building is one of the few remaining examples of Art Deco architecture in Charleston that retains its original details, and while simple, are well executed and highly indicative of the style. Notably, this is also the last remaining historic building fronting this block of King Street, which serves as the only record of the scale and character of the buildings that once occupied the streetscape and should weigh heavily in considering its preservation. The building appears to be in structurally sound condition, with any deficiencies able to be addressed as outlined in the application materials. The BAR routinely denies demolition of structures in significantly worse condition, which are then able to be successfully rehabilitated for continued use. Finally, we feel it is unfortunate the project team forged ahead with developing a new design without contemplating how to sensitively incorporate the historic building into their program. A creative plan could embrace the evolution of King Street by both introducing a new building that speaks to Charleston's future while preserving the historic building and honoring its past. We have seen recent examples of large new construction projects that have successfully retained historic buildings, such as 511 Meeting Street, and feel confident it could be done here as well. So in conclusion, we urge the board to deny demolition of the building due to its cultural and architectural significance. And we also appeal to the applicant to consider the value of preserving and incorporating the historic building into their program for the benefit of the public and future generations of Charleston residents. Thank you.
Thank you, Erin. Mr. Chair, we had two other registrants to speak. One of them was Mr. Jarrett Hodson. He is not on the call that I can find, but he did submit a letter. Okay. And the second one was Helen Hill, and I do not see her on the call. Okay. So if you'd like, we can either move into the letters or the public comments.
Well, I am looking through your spreadsheet and I have a mix of letters and public comments, and I was just going to start Following along in your sheet with the comment of Miss Megan Mills, 37 Poplar Street. I'm on your spreadsheet under that, and I can read her
Sounds perfect.
comments, and then I was going to go to the letters farther down in the chain. Is that okay?
That sounds great. Thank you.
And for those members of the public who are not familiar with this process, I reserve to my right as the chair the ability to strain out any information that is not within the purview of the BAR, those being zoning or livability issues. The issues that I will recite that are contained in the public comment are those that are pertinent to the aesthetic merits of the particular project, the neighborhood, et cetera. So with that preface, we'll begin with Ms. Megan Mills, resident of 37 Poplar Street. My name is Megan Mills. I'm a North Central resident at 37 Poplar Street. I write in support of the demolition of 609 to 613 King. Please allow the project team to move forward with demolishing and at the design senior living proposed. City of Charleston is growing and changing. This building has been mostly unused and not really attractive. With the Upper King Street area, since I moved here 15 years ago, we are only afforded a limited number of opportunities, especially in the urban core district, so it is important to move forward. At the intersection of Columbus and King, we have one of these good opportunities. We can seize that opportunity and can work to create a place that adds to growing Upper King area or miss it terribly and leave this unremarkable and unattractive building. We need please vote to allow the applicants to demolish this building. Alex Olson of 595 King Street. I'm writing in support of the request to demolish 609 to 613 King. It is no longer considered consistent with the plan for Upper King Street, nor is it consistent with the building adjacent to it. Hoffler's Place size and scale and the approved 7-story height limit for the building just to the north of 609 King will further accentuate its inconsistency. To be more consistent with the previously approved projects in the area and to not jeopardize streetscapes and future revitalization, the structure should be demolished. I asked the BAR to allow its demolition. Alex Ramsey, 95 Chadwick Drive. To whom it may concern, I'm writing in support of the demolition of 609 King Street. I own and have renovated 42 Spring Street, 44 Spring Street, 46 Spring Street, and 204 St. Philip, all properties that are adjacent to the proposed Liberty development. Efforts to save and honor important buildings like the ones we have restored are important and one of the many things that makes Charleston special, but I don't believe this policy should extend to every building in the city, especially one as unremarkable and historically insignificant as 609 King. Charleston should pride itself not only for historic properties, but also new and impressive architectural structures. Not every building should be considered historically significant just because of its age, especially the cinder block retail strip. There are better examples of Art Deco architecture that are far more worthy of saving. Thank you and hope you approve the demolition. Lynn Hanlon, 67 Meeting Street. I find the request for demolition is an egregious power grab by the owner who should know better and a developer who wants to get as much development as possible on the site. Both parties should know better. They know the rules for working within the city's old and historic district. They're widely published. It takes a lot for the BAR to agree to demolition. The buildings at 609 King are in structurally sound condition and are excellent examples of the vibrant business, cultural Greek, African-American neighborhood. Sadly, this neighborhood is being overrun by massive buildings that have no architectural relationship to existing structures. I'm disappointed that owners, local residents would seriously consider this project appropriate. The developer has not studied an alternate plan, but simply wants to tear down and build a new structure with no relationship to Charleston architecture, which is what makes Charleston unique. The uniqueness brought them to Charleston, and they need to respect the uniqueness, not obliterate it. They show no hardship. The rest is not germane. Charleston deserves better. Charles Altman, 575 King Street. My family company, Charles Realty Company, owns the properties located at 573 through 579 King Street, which are located approximately 2 blocks from the subject property. The properties owned by our family company had been in the family since the early 1950s in one case and the mid-70s in the other. As a result, we're very familiar with the area and the subject property. I drive by the subject property on a regular basis, and candidly, I never really noticed it until there was an effort to demolish it. I believe the reason for this is it really does not lend to the fabric of the neighborhood. There's no reason to think this property in any way contributes to what Charleston is looking to preserve. Also, being the son of immigrants and being fully aware of the contribution of the immigrant community to Upper King Street, I do not see where the property makes any contribution to that very important history to the Charleston community. We believe that the board should approve the application to demolish the buildings. John Powell, 68 St. Margaret Street. To whom it may concern, I'm writing in support of the request to demolish 609 to 613 King Street. I live in Wagner Terrace. and work at 211 Meeting Street. I traverse King Street each day and passing the building listed in this request. I do not believe this building adds value to Charleston, nor do I believe it is consistent with the plan for Upper King Street. I'm familiar with the project team personally and can attest to their previous work. I have full faith this demolition will allow for the maximization of this tremendous opportunity. I support the demolition of 609 to 613 King Street and the beautiful building the project team has brought. I ask the BAR to approve this request. Jenny Bush, Water Street, Charleston. Please deny the demolition request, allowing demolition of a structurally sound and architecturally unique building. The architect has not presented alternatives for preserving it as part of a larger project, sends a bad message that would discourage thoughtful redevelopment plans in the future. The BARL should require convincing evidence on the necessity of demolition rather than grant a demolition permit for the convenience of the architect. Jack Owens, 509 Ocean Boulevard. Like so many people in the area, I'm a stakeholder in the successful growth of the city of Charleston. I maintain an office downtown at 141 Williman Street and own properties in Walnut and East Street. Because of these properties, I often pass 609 to 613 King Street, hoping someone would demolish this nondescript building and redevelop the property along the stretch of King Street. Proposed plan to add residential units, and I'm not going to rule that as not germane. Saving the cinder block building that has been vacant more often than has been leased over the past 20 years is providing no benefit to retailers and the community in this area. I encourage you to allow this property to be demolished and get residents living in this area of town. Justin Schwebler, who normally is with us in person, has made a written submission. Historic Charleston Foundation. We would first like to thank the applicants for taking the time to meet with us and provide justification for the demolition request of the buildings at 609 to 613 King Street. We would also like to thank them for their commitment to document not only the structure with an architectural history report, but to analyze its context within other King Street properties. Despite the applicant's request, we do not find sufficient reason to justify the demolition of this historic building. We find that 609 King Street is emblematic of the 1- and 2-story mercantile structures that used to populate Upper King Street in the neighborhood of Little Jerusalem, and is now one of the last remaining buildings of that era. The building is not a high style example of Art Deco, but it is a successful representation of the vernacular execution of the type. Most importantly, it retains its original character defining features. While there may not be a significant event or person tied to the history of the structure, preservation is not just about saving only the most beautiful or grand structures in our city. It is about preserving a vestige of our diverse cultural past, which is unfortunately slowly being diminished, especially on the peninsula. We believe that this building can be successfully preserved and incorporated into larger scale projects that may evolve on the surrounding properties. We recommend denial of this application for demolition. I'm now moving from the electronically submitted comments through the portal to letters and emails received by city staff. Letter from Andrew Gould, 21 Catfiddle Street. I'm writing to support the demolition request for 609 King Street. While I've always supported preservation of historic structures that exhibit design and craftsmanship worthy of conservation, cannot see that the structure meets any standard objectively applied. Although the facade has Art Deco styling, upon looking closely and considering the actual materiality with which the facade is built, it is impossible to find any single element that is well built or beautiful. It appears to have been constructed as a cheap and temporary building with only the most superficial styling in the fashion of the time. Furthermore, I'm concerned by the emerging argument that the entire structure ought to be preserved merely because it once contributed to a larger context of culture, economic and cultural activity. This is an argument that would apply to literally any building and would seem to undermine the preservation movement, which has always been based upon preserving structures with demonstrable artistic merit. Letter from Mike Schuler, 559 King Street. My name is Mike Schuler from 559 King Street. I'm writing today in support of the application for demolition of 609 613 King. As a native Charlestonian, like many of you, have witnessed an ongoing renaissance of the Upper King Street corridor, a once great hub of commerce, now evolving block from decades of decay and neglect into what is slated to be a truly world-class mixed-use district. It's an early pioneer of the renaissance of Upper King Street corridor and an active owner-operator of numerous properties and businesses in the immediate vicinity of the subject property. Have a truly unique perspective on the pulse of the street. Despite substantial progress made over the years, there are still significant challenges to overcome. The success of these future infill development sites and how they're able to capture King Street's needs, both present and future, will dramatically impact the success of the entire street as a vibrant mixed-use hub for years to come. Current structure, in my humble opinion, though technically historic, is relative to most King Street buildings unremarkable, and due to its position and stature will likely become lost in translation with the dynamics of development and the entirety of the surrounding area. It should not be idolized. Pitting the very noble cause of preservation versus the responsible development, in my opinion, is a false choice. In consideration of demolition of the structure, I would urge you not to consider the choice of demolition setting a negative precedent, but instead consider it a positive precedent to be thoughtful, responsible, and high quality development are desperately needed on Upper King. It is my hope and many the hope of our King Street neighbors that all of these developments are successful in ushering in the next chapter on the street. David Crowley, 131 Columbus Street. My name is David Crowley. I'm the owner operator of the Alley Charleston at 131 Columbus Street. As a business owner in the immediate area, I support the demolition request on behalf of the Evening Post Publishing Company. First and foremost, I believe it's paramount the city continues to develop in a strategic way that benefits all of its residents, businesses, and preserves the important historical structures necessary moving forward. That being said, as a small business owner who passes by 609 King Street every day, I certainly think there could be a better use than the current existing structure. Removing the building with good intentions would indeed benefit the city residents and give new opportunities for small businesses. There's been little use or tenant occupancy of the space in recent years. I believe there could be a better path for this specific property in the future.
Hey, I'm still on the Zoom call.
Let's see.
Okay, how'd it go?
The next paragraph is not germane. Somebody's not muted. If they could check to make sure they're muted. I know that they have the best interest of the city of Charleston in mind with regard to a better plan for 609 King Street.
Are you on Eastern Time or Central?
I'm trying to find it, Mr. Chair.
Who's not muted?
All right, Darren. I'll call you in a little bit.
It's Marion.
Okay, thanks.
Okay, I got it. I've experienced their generosity, kindness, and legitimate care for small business livelihoods for over 10 years and trust their intentions. Katie Evans, 4 Kenilworth Avenue. I'm writing to urge you to deny the demolition of 609 King Street. This is one of the last remaining Art Deco buildings in the city and part of the rich legacy of Black and immigrant-owned businesses. I believe that the building is an important part of our city, our history, and should be preserved for generations to come. Thank you for the opportunity to voice my concerns. Jarrett Hodson, 25 Cumberland Street. I own 67 Line Street, located on the same block as 609 King. It is my understanding a meeting to discuss the demolition of structures to be held August 11. I have a vested interest in this block and want to express a few reasons why I support the demolition of this structure. During my interactions with EPI, they've been accommodating and open with their plans for the future. The rest of that's not really germane. I'm an advocate for maintaining Charleston's historic houses and structures. However, based on my research, I do not feel this building falls in the historic category I want to preserve. It appears to be made of modern era cinder block, which aesthetically doesn't fit with either the new or historic buildings in the surrounding area. If this building is not demolished and the surrounding areas are developed, I'm concerned it does not have sufficient parking and will add to already limited on-street parking for Upper King. Alan Wood. I'm writing in support of the request to demolish 609 and 613 King Street. I live on the peninsula and our firm owns 483 Meeting Street just around the corner from this property. Please allow the project team to move forward with demolishing 609 and 613 King. We should encourage this part of King Street to develop into a dense, multi-use and walkable district. The current condition of 609 and 613 King Street offers little benefit to the city in terms of aesthetics or use. Alternatively, a BAR influenced building that takes full advantage of the central location will be a significant improvement to the existing condition and will benefit a large number of citizens. If the inability to demolish halts the larger redevelopment of this area, then we will have missed an excellent opportunity to bring additional placemaking and diversity of use to this part of King Street. Bronco Damjanovic. I own property at 54 Line Street, originally from, let's see, I saw a very different city 25 years ago. It's improved drastically for the good and it's still improving. I'm writing this email to support to demolish 609 to 613 King Street. The cinder block building is not attractive and not a good example of architecture at all. There are multiple examples of Art Deco on King Street and throughout Charleston and far better in keeping with the size and scale of their surroundings. Along with being a poor representation of architectural style, it also doesn't fit with overall plans for the street. Please vote for the applicants to demolish the building. This is not a significant building and certainly not a reason to save a nondescript building such as this. I support the applicant's request to demolish 609 to 613 and ask the BAR to approve that request. I support the applicant's request because of how unremarkable and both the appearance and the history of this building are. Efforts to save and honor important buildings are important and one of the many things that makes Charleston special, but we can't extend that to every nondescript building in the city. If we did so, we'd be preventing growth and betterment of Charleston and lessening the chance of a truly historic structure will get the attention that it deserves in the future. 609-613 King is no longer consistent with the plan for Upper King Street, nor is it consistent with the building adjacent to it. Hoffler's place size and scale and the approval of a 7-story height limit just to the north will accentuate this inconsistency. Allowing it to remain will create an awkward streetscape and it will look like a holdout. I asked the BAR to allow its demolition. King Street deserves to be a focal point. It would be a shame to allow an 80-year-old cinder block building to be the thing that prevents revitalization from being all it can be. King Street is one of our most important streets. We should make sure that we do all we can to make sure that it is attractive and welcoming as possible. Please allow the project team to move forward with demolishing 609-613 King Street. The rest is not really germane. Daniel Atwill, 238 St. Philip Street. 609-613 King Street is no longer consistent with the plan for Upper King Street, nor is it consistent with the building adjacent to it, Hoffler's place size and scale, and the approved 7-story height limit for the building just north of 609-613 King will further accentuate its inconsistency. Allowing it to remain will create an awkward streetscape and will look like a holdout. I asked the BAR to allow its demolition. Mitchell Norval, BAR Board. I'm the owner of a Class A office building at 677 King and the 5 renovated historical structures on Shepherd Street adjacent to the new office building that encompass 9 apartment units. I believe we have successfully worked with the BAR, large and small boards and city staff to really provide 2 projects that represent the best of Charleston. In a very visible location, we have managed to build a modern but contextual correct new office building and renovate a group of historic structures in a way that adds to the architectural fabric of the city while meeting the current needs of the users of the property. We support saving of historically significant structures and embrace that responsibility to create new projects that work to improve the city. I'm writing in support of the request to demolish 609-613 King for a few reasons. I support the applicant's request because of how unremarkable both the appearance and the history of the building are. Efforts to save and honor local and important buildings are important and one of many things that makes Charleston special, but we can't extend that to every nondescript building in the city. If we did so, we would be preventing the growth and betterment of Charleston and lessening the chance that truly historic structures will get the attention that it deserves in the future. I think the stretch of King Street is a terrific opportunity to create a series of architecturally significant projects that will support ongoing revitalization, one of the most important streets in Charleston. As neighbors, we have a vested interest in this project being developed and done so in the right way. Build something architecturally meaningful on the site that will contribute to the overall neighborhood. Frederick Simon, 58 Sherwood Avenue. To whom it may concern, I'm writing in support of the request to demolish 609-613 King. My name is Frederick Simon. I'm the owner of nearby properties to the subject located at 587 King, 585 King, and 540 King. The subject properties are not particularly attractive nor remarkable, appear to have no historical importance, and in my opinion, antithetical to improving context and streetscape being developed on Upper King Street. Failure to allow that demolition would, I believe, be a major setback for continuing improvement of the Upper King Street corridor. Miller Harper, 299 East Bay Street. My name is Miller Harper. I'm the managing partner of East West Partners in Charleston. Our offices are located at 299 East Bay Street. We've been involved in new developments and renovations of existing properties on the peninsula. I don't often support demolition of existing buildings, but believe there are special instances where the benefits of a new plan and opportunity far outweigh the preservation of an existing structure. I believe this is the case with 609-613 King Street. Due to the site's location and size, I believe that the development team has a tremendous opportunity to create a special place on the site, and that it would be a shame for an unremarkable 80-year-old cinder block building to prevent this opportunity. Thomas Gore, 1049 Morrison Drive. Dear BAR, my business is located downtown at 1049 Morrison Drive, and I'm writing in support of the request to demolish 609-613 King Street. Efforts to save and honor important things are important and one of many things that makes Charleston special, but we can't extend that to every nondescript building in the city. If we did so, it would be preventing the growth and betterment of Charleston and lessening the chance that a truly historic structure will get the attention that it deserves in the future. The terminus of King Street deserves to be a focal point. It would be a shame to allow an 80-year-old cinder block building to be the thing that prevents the revitalization from being all that it can be. King Street is one of our most important streets, and we should do everything we can to ensure that it is as attractive and welcoming as possible. I'm in support of demolishing 609 to 613 King Street and making way for a beautiful building the project team has in mind. I asked the BAR to allow its demolition. We have Erin Minigan's letter in the record. She is, of course, spoken. Email from D. Frank Haygood, 642 King. Dear BAR board staff, the landmark building proposed at this significant intersection of Upper King will be diminished in an effort to design and build around the existing concrete block structure in question. The past use of this property should not be entirely obliterated by the wrecking ball, and certainly a tribute to the heritage could be creatively incorporated and memorialized in the design of the new building. I believe that's a duplicate. Christopher Price, King Street, please accept this letter as full support for the demolition of 609 to 613 King Street. Our company, the Prime South Group, represents and owns an extensive portfolio of properties on King Street and the surrounding area, including properties at the southwest corner of Spring and King. The next paragraph is really as to the following agenda items. I'm going to leave that out, except where it says we certainly support preservation, but in this case, demolition approval is warranted. Mariana Hay, 308 King Street. I care deeply for our wonderful King Street and devoted my life to helping make King Street the economic spine of our city. King Street is a treasure. Every decision should never be taken lightly. I'm writing in support of the request to demolish 609 to 613 King Street. The building is neither attractive nor a good example of Art Deco architecture. Those buildings have been important assets to King Street and have never been easy to rent because of the space requirements. For most of my life, they sat empty. I trust the family that owns the Post and Courier, and I know they only have the best interest of the street at heart. And the rest is not really germane. Richard McElroy. My name is Richard McElroy. I work and live in Charleston. I live in the Hampton Park Wagner Terrace neighborhood for 16 years. We've seen our area in the peninsula change a lot. Moved to Hampton Park from the corner of Elizabeth and John Street in 2006, and we've seen drastic changes in our neighborhood that have taken place from John Street north on King Street in downtown Charleston. I'm writing in support of the request to demolish 609 to 613 King Street. Like much of the development on the north end of the city, there's an acute need for change to improve where we live. The city has done a fantastic job doing so carefully. The north end of King Street is the entrance to our city and deserves to be a focal point. It would be a shame to allow an 80-year-old cinder block building to be the thing that prevents that revitalization from continuing to be maximized for the sake of our residents and visitors. King Street is one of our most important streets, and we should do everything we can to make sure it's attractive and welcoming as possible. I'm in support of demolition. Kevin Eberly, 367 President Street. I would like to register my very strong opposition to demolishing the historic stores at 609, 611, 613 King Street. The original building at the corner of Rogers Alley was built in 1876. That two-story frame triplex lasted several decades, but in 1936, the owners decided to replace it. The earlier building was thought to be a fire hazard. Notable architect Stephen Thomas designed the replacement. Although the footprint of the building did not change much, it was still a triplex. The design of the building obviously did. The new building was only one floor in a then fashionable deco style. Stephen Thomas was the go-to architect for Charleston in the 1930s and first to regularly undertake significant projects in the uptown. His residential projects, such as 145 Moultrie Street, were typically colonial revival. However, his non-residential projects include the A. Burnett Rhett School, now the eastern half of Burke High School, were decidedly less traditional and more deco. While the building is simple, so are all the other ones in the area. The building's block was home to a Chinese laundry, grocery store, barbershop, and cafe in the 1930s. Only someone unfamiliar with King Street would use that far grander structures of lower King Street, such as the Riviera Theater and Crest Building, as comparison. The Crest Building, for instance, cost $165,000 in 1930. 609 King Street cost $13,600, or 92% less. Hope the BAR would not protect only the single best, most expensive buildings of a style. And I'm going to have to go back into my computer, take a reading break for just a second. One moment. Scroll that letter. Excuse me. Back to Mr. Everly's letter. Moreover, the applicant is also wrong that a small commercial building is not in keeping with the size, scale, and mass of the area. Many uptown commercial buildings were one story. 584, 585, 700, 708, and 710 King Street are all single story 20th century commercial buildings on King Street, just between Cannon Street and the Crosstown Overpass. In 1944, there were more than a dozen single-story businesses on the same block. No evidence suggests that the building has been significantly altered. Even the report of Ms. Jones, which missed both the construction date and the architect, wrongly cites only a single work permit for adding a sign in 1935 to justify the baseless claim that several alterations were made to the new facade throughout the 1930s. As I discussed with Steve Ramos of LS3P 2 years ago, rather than demolishing the building, it should be incorporated into the plans. The only structural issue with the building is it does not meet the current building code, but neither does any historic building in Charleston. In 5 years, no replacement will either. The owner should have first decided to preserve the historic building and then have the architect design a building on the remaining lot. LS3P, that's not really germane. They should not be able to demolish historic buildings to achieve the lot they want. Historically, there were many other commercial buildings on King Street between Columbus and Line Street, but the newspaper demolished them all in favor of parking lot in the 1960s. The survivor should not join its neighbors. Barb Osteen, 465 Meeting Street. I'm writing in support of the demolition of 609 King Street. My support of this project is in large part due to the proximity of the intersection of two buildings that Greystar manages, the Guild and Elon Midtown. We believe that our neighborhood is special, and so do our long-term residents of both communities. We believe that walkability is one of the most attractive attributes to our location, and betterment of King Street is part of the experience that makes Elon, Midtown, and the Guild great places to live. Please allow the project team to move forward with demolishing 609 King Street. Charleston is remarkable in part because it does a great job of taking advantage of opportunities when they present themselves. At the intersection of Columbus and King, we have those opportunities. We can seize that opportunity to work to create a place that helps define Upper King or miss it terribly and leave this unremarkable and unattractive building. We should not miss a chance. Roy D. Neal, Town of Mount Pleasant. I'm writing in support of the demolition of 609 and 613 King Street to allow a great replacement project to occur in ongoing changing environment and development of King Street. I'm the owner of El Jefe Texican Cantina located at 468 King Street. Let's see. This is not really germane. I'm well versed in the nature of development of King Street. I do not support just any project easily. So much effort is being put into development of Charleston, and it scares many locals, but it is the right development that needs to occur. Then the rest of this is related to the next item on the agenda. 100% support the applicant's request to demolish 609 and 613 King Street. Please feel free to, that's the end of that. And that is all. How did I do on that marathon, Ms. Parrish?
You did great.
Okay.
Thank you for that.
Are you aware of any public comment that I have missed?
No, and that package that I sent you, I'm sorry, I mislabeled the next page. I think you have covered every public comment.
Thank you. And I would note for the record that there are a great number of the comments that were in supporting agenda items number 6. Now, of course, pull that out because we're talking about agenda item number 5 of merits of demolition. We will now move to city staff comments and recommendations.
Okay. We will begin with staff comments. Number 1, as part of the Planning, Preservation, and Sustainability Department, the BAR staff exists within the Urban Design and Preservation Division. And we find that these two disciplines are at odds with each other over this application. Number 2, architecturally, the building has an Art Deco themed front facade composed of simple stucco detailing. I will clarify, outside of the storefront floor plans, we do believe that this to be the original facade and find it to be the character defining feature of the building. The remainder of the building is a simple 1-story block building with no notable detailing or facade treatment. Number 3, the building received a rating of 0 during the 1986 architectural inventory. It was not rated during the 1974 categorization. Number 4, the architect, Stephen Thomas, had a diverse body of work in Charleston. Along with this commercial building, he designed several colonial revival houses, a post office, and an elementary school. This appears to be one of his lesser yet more highly visible works. Number 5, the context of this section of King Street has changed drastically and now includes several larger multi-story buildings. This is one of the last historically scaled buildings on this section of King Street. Number 6, while no major historic event appears to have occurred in this building or on this site, the tenants in this building included immigrant-owned businesses. These businesses and their ethnicities are indicative of the daily commerce activity that would have occurred on this block of King Street and may have been central to this community. Number 7, most of the discussion over cultural and historical importance relates to activity of the larger community rather than this building specifically. And number 8, this building is located at an important geographic position in the city of Charleston, and representatives of the neighborhood, as well as many others, have spoken in favor of demolition. The city recommendation is approval for demolition with the incorporation of commemoration of the community through an interpretive experience at the future alley or other public realm area. Interpretive elements shall include art, artifacts, displays, signage, salvage building elements, or other permanent items that tell the story of this community and its importance within a 20th century growing Charleston.
Realized I was muted. Thank you for that, Ms.
Like, did I shock you?
Thank you, Mrs. Parrish. That was great. The applicant will now have an opportunity to respond if they choose to exercise it.
Yes, if I might, this is Scott Parker. I just wanted to sort of summarize a few points as you go into your deliberation. First, the EPI family has a proven history of preservation excellence, and that includes the immediate block. Many of the historic structures on St. Philip Street were actually damaged during Hugo. The Evening Post stepped in, purchased the buildings, preserved them, and made it possible for Historic Charleston Foundation to actually put covenants on the structures and to resell them so that they could be preserved and used going forward. As you've seen from the comments, there's broad and deep support from the surrounding neighborhood and business community in favor of demolition. I think we've said as well and demonstrated as well the absence of any real architectural significance for the building. This is really an unremarkable suburban building with unremarkable uses in a very important location within our city. And we believe there are better ways to reveal the history of our city than retaining this building. Thank you.
Thank you. All right. We'll now move to a board discussion and potential vote. What do my fellow board members have to say about agenda item number 5?
I might jump in quickly on this one. Quickly, but not that quickly. We don't really see that many demo requests to BAR large. It's just the nature of our purview. But when we do, and this is one of those, we really ought to pay very close attention to the fact that the demolition request has to stand completely on its own. And this is something that often confuses the public. As you could see in a lot of the public comment that we received, commenters were talking as much about the new proposal as about this building. But as a reminder to all of us, I think it's important that we judge this building strictly upon its own merits. And it's good that people have brought the language of the ordinance to the forefront, because I think that's also very important for us, so that we don't stray from what our real mandate is. And our mandate fundamentally is to preserve the historic character of the city. And when that was first introduced into the city ordinances in the 1930s, they had a very different impression of what historic character meant. Preservation is a discipline that allows itself to grow and change and mature. And there are buildings that we would guard very carefully today that in the 74 or 85 surveys were not considered to be valuable in any manner. I do consider this building to be valuable to this portion of King Street. I do see it as contributory to the story of Upper King, not only in architectural terms, but cultural terms as well. And that's specifically indicated in our ordinance. I think that there's some stuff to consider. The fact that the building's built of obsolete materials, that's very common. The fact that it doesn't meet code, well, that's typical of pretty much any historic building. And the code gives you the latitude to work around those issues without destroying the integrity of that historic structure. So that argument doesn't really hold any water for me. The fact that it's single story, that's not an impediment. Our ordinance doesn't disallow single story buildings, and there are a number of mid-century single story buildings in these blocks of King Street that do contribute to the life and scale of the street. The fact that it's a low style versus a high style building, that doesn't concern me either. Most of the buildings that we preserve in Charleston are actually on their own merits, relatively simple structures with a low architectural style, but they still contribute. So I cannot see a path where this board can approve the demolition of this building while staying true to our mandate.
Thank you, Mr. White. Other board members?
I'll jump in. This is Eddie Fava. It's a tough situation for everybody when something of this nature comes to the board, and respectfully, that brought up and much of Mr. White's points were just reiterated them there. But with the size and scale being out of proportion with the street, or it doesn't conform to the master plan, or the axial relationship of the terminus of Columbus Street, I don't think any of those are reasons to allow its demolition. Now, on the other hand, I do think if it's structural integrity, although again, as Mr. White said, there are many buildings that we deal with that are able to be retrofitted and saved. But buildings as a whole, I don't feel like this one has that. And then you start looking at the facadectomy, where it's just got the facade, and that seems kind of silly to me in this instance. It seems like there needs to be some level of craftsmanship or merit that this building should exhibit, and I don't think it does. The cultural and historical importance of the region, or that 2 or 3 blocks, is what is important. I don't think it is this building that does that. So, for ironically some of the same reasons that was just spoken by my fellow board member and others, I don't feel like it's something that's worth saving, and it's not in any way, shape, or form looking at what's coming after this application. To be honest, I haven't even done that, because that matters nothing to me. But for many of the same reasons that Mr. White just enumerated, I ironically feel different. And having visited it and walked through it, it just seems that it's really tough to see that the building itself merits saving. Again, if it were something of a similar scale, be it small at the terminus or whatnot, a freedman's cottage, an old kitchen house, or something of that nature. But again, having gone through the building, walked around the perimeter of it, I'm looking at photos I took when I was there, inside and out. You could, as a stretch, maybe save portions of the facade, but they're all kind of applied and thinly done. That it just, again, I think it's a stretch to say that the building as a whole warrants saving.
Thank you, Mr. David.
Yes, sir.
Other board members?
So, Mr. Chairman?
Yes, sir.
The system is working in Charleston, South Carolina, as it should be. I'm proud, as I hope all of you are. that we are all committed to being part of this discussion, regardless of your position. I appreciate Richard meeting Eddie earlier in the day yesterday and me later in the day so we could independently look at this building. Richard, you said a few things that why was it bad to use cinder block to construct that building? I think you said it's too bad that you use cinder block to construct that building. I mean, cinder block is a perfectly fine material to be used to construct that building. I'm just gonna go through a few things. Stephen Thomas, you know, when Stephen Thomas began his work here, he worked with other architectural firms and was involved in some, I think, unique projects, but the most unique one for me is the house I live in. I live at 145 Moultrie Street, and I find it to be a unique property for the city of Charleston. I don't really hold Jonathan Poston's book up to be the end all be all for what should or shouldn't be done in the city. So the fact that Jonathan Poston gives this a 0 for rating, it does not, that's not that significant for me. I'm not sure why we would have ever addressed the demolition of this building until an application was made for demolition on the building. Almost every building in the city has been modified. There's very few that hadn't been modified. Almost every building in the city needs substantial upfit to meet current code. In some cases, even new buildings that have just been built need some upfit to meet current code. You have Jay taking a position, and you have Eddie taking the same information and taking another position. You have members of our community that are taking positions on this project, which I just think is terrific. It means that people care. And that leads me to the importance for me of knowing the really exact details of the fabric of this building. The front facade, the tile parapet caps, the tile at the entrances to the front door, dimension lumber versus non-dimension lumber. And what do we have here that's actually part of the original structure? 5%, 3%, or 75%? I don't know the answer to that. I'd like to know. And I'd also like to know, Mr. Chairman, I'd like to ask a question that I think we could get an answer to. When did the design team start communicating with interested parties about this project? And where I'm going with this is, irregardless of when that happened, was there meaningful dialogue, or was the project pretty well designed when the interested parties started to be approached with this idea for development? And I don't actually know which way I'm going to vote on this yet, but what I do know is that I would like to, and maybe I can get the answer now, but I would like to know if each of the interested parties and the design firm felt like they had open dialogue and an opportunity to have an open dialogue, or was there just, here's what we're going to do, and the Preservation Society, Historic Charleston Foundation didn't really have maybe we can just save the front. Maybe we can save the front and 5 feet back. Or do we have to have the whole thing? I mean, has there been open dialogue about this? I don't know if there has or hadn't, or if people are just not interested in any position other than their own. I think what's most important for me, Mr. Chairman, is that I'm proud of our city and our architects and the Evening Post Publishing Company, Preservation Society, Historic Charleston Foundation, and my fellow board members for, caring about this. So I would like to know some additional specific information, a breakdown of the materials of that building, what is still original so we can know. And I would like to know if each of the parties feel like the other party has had open dialogue. And maybe that's possible, maybe it's not, but knowing the answer to that's important to me. That's all I have.
Mr. Metters, what I would say is that, and I think you'll understand, I know you'll understand this, is that because part of that question would entail project number 6, and because I would not want to impair these deliberations with that or foul it up for any purpose of the future record, I would say you leave that as an open question rather than ask that to the applicant if that's okay, being duly noted as something for us to consider.
Well, fair enough, Mr. Chairman.
Is that all right?
Yes, sir.
Okay. Further board comments?
This is Leon Scott. In short, I want to thank everybody, thank all board members for sharing so much of your knowledge, and as Mr. Metter said, and caring so much. This is a tough one. I can, as you have all shared, can certainly respect both sides of the argument. But as a board member, and as Jay said, we have so few demolitions that it sort of takes a precedent over it's sort of either existing buildings or non-existing buildings that come to ground. I'm just in a finding it really difficult to say it's okay to demolish that building, just based upon all of the information I've received. And again, I'm weighing both sides. I'm trying to weigh both sides equally. It's a difficult one, and Mr. Metter, I really don't know at this point how I would vote. But I am taking a strong position, I think, of having a difficult time of just demolishing that building. So again, I'm on the fence with this one.
Thank you.
That's all I have.
I'll note this for the record. Looking back specifically at ordinance, section 54-240, Article B. In reviewing an application to demolish or demolish in part any exterior architectural appearance of any existing structure, the board shall consider, among other things, the historic, architectural, and aesthetic features of such structure, nature, character, surrounding area. We've had a number of comments, and this board has also approved a number of projects where, and I would argue on projects that are potentially less aesthetically pleasing in this area of Upper King, Upper Meeting. It's required incorporation, or the planner has incorporated an existing facade that roughly dates from this era, if not a little newer in some cases. And I would suggest that they're not nearly as substantial as this particular facade. And I don't see that there's been a lot of attempt, or not aware of attempt, to incorporate some of these facades, even if it's just the veneer, into a building. And I know my architect friends on this board will have their, as Mr. Fava has said, a facade-ectomy. There are some merits to be discussed, or lack of merit to be discussed, in just pasting an existing facade on the structure that's behind it. It's something that one has to be sensitive to, and it has to be well executed. And I'm aware of why it is an issue on what the applicant wants to make into a marquee corner of Charleston with a massive or landmark edifice, presumably. And I understand that a one-story facade, 14 feet exterior, 9-foot interior ceilings, does not fit into that model. I believe that this particular project for me is teetering on the balance. One has to question that because we've demolished so much remarkable architecture in Charleston, is it because we see the few examples left, particularly in a more vernacular pedestrian style, we feel more compelled to save them just because they are old as opposed to them standing on their merit. But I do, despite what many people have said about being nondescript, I've driven past this corner many times and have thought about this particular facade and have thought about particularly the pilasters on the front of it as standing out at least at a street level in Charleston. I think that the applicant is correct. That certainly edifices like Crest have a much more rich facade. The Riviera is a massive building with some. So the massing on the Riviera is just incredible, especially if you look at the whole of the building. So I understand why this vernacular example, or one that doesn't incorporate the most refined aspects of Art Deco, it seemed to be unremarkable. But this board member, for one, having driven past it for many, many years, including when that neighborhood's much rougher, would have to say that he does not think it is unremarkable from the streetscape, certainly when you're driving along in your automobile. That may have been saying too much, but this is a difficult choice for me, and what I was leaning to in my language, at least for discussion on the board, potential motion, potential deferral. If we did go ahead with a demolition or partial demolition, was the notion, if the board wants to entertain it, of saving just the what would that be? The easternmost elevation facing onto King Street of this property. Or whether we think that it seems to be everyone, including preservation groups, agrees that the merit of this building is tied up in the facade as opposed to any other elevation. If the facade alone was standing, does that have merit? And perhaps my architect friends could speak to whether this particular facade could be integrated into a different project. But then at the same time, I'm reticent to get into that conversation now, absent a deferral, because as Mr. White has cautioned us instead, said we have to view this project on its merits. And I'm in the very difficult position of not believing that this project, the existing building, has no merit. And I'll leave it at that, having talked out loud for a minute and see what my designer and architect friends on the board think about that.
It gave us time to think. I mean, I think that there have been scenarios in Charleston where a portion of a historic building has been retained and incorporated into proposals, but I think that's best left to the applicant to determine. And I think right now we're being asked to render judgment on a request for total demolition. So we just ought to just sort of stick with that. Right. There might be a future proposal that, depending on the way this goes, that might alter that strategy. Who knows? Yeah, I think I mean these are difficult decisions, and I going back to something that I alluded to earlier, we do have a maturing set of values in preservation. And you're absolutely right that, 20, 30 years ago, nobody would have thought a single thing about this building. But, when the preservation movement first, set its roots in the 1920s, a great many of those people had no love whatsoever for Victorian architecture. And it was later that those buildings were found to be valuable. Now we've had a similar conversation crop up in the last 20 years about mid-century modernism. If you remember the little bit of a fight we had over the Arcade Theater way back when, that's kind of an example of this. I think that in order to be clear and with our position in our direction to the applicant, I don't think that a deferral is really going to get us anywhere Because I think that we as a board have all sort of settled into our respective positions to a great extent. So unless anybody has any other comments, I was going to introduce a motion.
Look, does any board member have any further comment for Mr. White's motion?
I just briefly, go on, sorry.
No, go ahead, Eddie.
I think the only thing, like I said, and not looking at what's after, and I haven't, but when you say distill the application of this, and I know, like you said, we're in our positions, and it's very interesting that we can both take the same sets of facts and realities and interpret it a different way. But I find a hard time saying the building itself has merit. I think events do. It's not. It doesn't have merit because of the quality of construction or the this or that, and I was trying to think outside the box. If we knew that what was next was a public park, which was going to go on the U-Haul site, but over here, would that change anybody's opinion, even though you're not supposed to think about that kind of stuff? I just think it's very tough for me personally, and no disrespect to those championing this, to honestly say that it warrants it. And I do think it has a little slippery slope thing. We use that term often, that the knee-jerk reaction that everything, just because it's not necessarily because it's good, or not necessarily maybe 6 blocks away something happened or something that warrants saving. And I'm a staunch president. I mean, that's my whole business. That's what we work on. But I just feel like it's somewhere, sometimes there's a line that needs to be drawn, and I just worry if that's being blurred with this. But again, that's it.
Thank you, Mr. Favor. Mr. Matters, do you want to?
Yes, I do, Mr. Chairman. Just based on what Jay's already said, what Eddie's already said, Leon said, and what you've said, I think Jay's right. I mean, everybody's kind of got their path. But what's most important for me is knowledge. And that's what drives my position. And when I say I'm not sure how I'm going to vote, it's because sitting here today, I don't have the knowledge about every component in that building. And if I did, I would say I know how I'm going to vote. And so I would ask that a consideration be given for a deferral in order to find that information out definitively by the professionals needed to give us that information. That would help me. That's it.
And you had articulated that before. I didn't know if you were going to build that into a motion for deferral, but you seem to be saying that would be definitive as to your position, Mr. Matters, right? It would contribute to my. I appreciate your vote on this item.
Well, I appreciate you following that up with me. It would bring clarity and help me make my decision. Because right now I don't know.
Okay.
Well, there are two areas it seems like you're curious about. One is the extent of public dialogue, and two, the extent of historic fabric that actually remains in the building. And I think the second question we've been able to observe, decently well. Not every nook and cranny, obviously, but decently well. And certainly the prominent facades appear to be more or less in the configuration that they always have. So, and the other thing is that while our ordinance says that it encourages applicants to communicate with stakeholder groups, neighborhoods, affected residents, the BAR has actually gotten into a little bit of hot water before by effectively mandating that an applicant do that or demonstrate the way in which they did it in order to get past the deferral. So I hear what you're saying, although I unfortunately, you're probably not going to like my motion, but I might introduce it anyway and just see how this goes. Okay, I'm going to move for denial of demolition, finding that the building retains sufficient historic fabric, contributes to the historic architectural character of the street, and illustrates the culturally significant period of its construction.
The last portion of that phrase, Mr. White,
okay.
adjective on that portion of the street.
Okay. And illustrates the culturally significant period of its construction.
Illustrates. Mr. White, your motion, if I've heard it correctly, is a motion to deny permit for demolition on the basis that there's sufficient historic fabric present, that the structure contributes to the character of the streetscape, and the building illustrates culturally significant era of its construction. Is that correct?
That's correct.
All right. That is the motion. Is there a second?
Leon Scott, I'll second it.
Okay, we have a motion and a second. We will therefore proceed to call the roll. Mr. Fava, how do you vote on this motion?
No.
Nay. Okay.
Nay,
Mr.
excuse
Scott, that's okay. Mr. Scott, how do you vote on this motion?
Yay in favor.
Mr. Metters?
I heard you call my name, Mr. Chairman.
Yes, and Mr. Metters, how do you vote on this motion?
No, I heard you. I just, I need a minute.
Oh, okay. Well, no pressure on our part. Please feel free to deliberate in your head. I'm going to not call further on the roll until you have voted.
Nay, not in favor.
And I'm going to vote nay, not in favor. So the motion, oh, Mr. White, you get to vote on your own motion.
It would be a foregone conclusion that I would vote yay in favor of.
Okay. So the motion fails 2-3. Mr. Metters, did you have a motion?
I do, Mr. Chairman.
Yes, sir.
And as I have a couple of times in the past, I may ask for some help putting it together. But the essence of it is that I would like to enter a motion for deferral of this project.
Okay. And any additional stipulations on that deferral?
Yes.
Okay.
Mr. Chairman,
Yes, sir.
could you read, I can't find it in my notes, the motion from the last meeting?
I can't, I'm sorry, the motion from the last meeting?
Yes.
Well, I don't know that we had the motion. Tori can correct me, but you'll recall that the applicant withdrew.
Yes.
In public comment, they exercised their right to withdraw both the demolition and the proposed construction.
All right, so Mr. Chairman, I'm thinking about a list of research. Maybe it's our ordinance. I'm looking for some language.
Okay, well, let me go back and was it the language that I read earlier?
Let's see here.
The ordinance is, if we want a visual on it, the section of the ordinance is in the, if y'all want us to pull it up, we can pull it up from our May meeting.
Please.
Okay, Lawrence, why don't you pull up the previous staff comments, because the agenda section will show up in there. Probably will have to go a ways back. I'm trying to remember where it is. Okay, here we go. No, that's new. Oh, yes, go back to the front. There we go. Okay, so if you go back another slide in the staff observation right there, yes. That's the language of the ordinance, that middle section.
Right, and that's what I read in my comments earlier. That may not be what you were referring to, Mr. Metters, but
Mr. Chairman, just give me another minute. I'm writing this out.
this is important. We've got time.
Mr. Chairman,
Yes, Mr. Metters.
the motion to defer this application for a definitive study into its structural condition, identifying original fabric that still exists, and then adding to that continued study of the historic architectural and aesthetic features the nature and character of the surrounding area, and the historic or culturally important use, period.
Metters, your motion, as I understand it, is a motion for deferral for a definitive study into the structural condition, identifying original fabric that still exists, and continued study of the historic, architectural, and aesthetic features, nature and character of surrounding area, and historic or culturally important use.
Yes.
Okay. Is there a second to that motion?
I'll second that.
I'm sorry, was that Mr. Scott?
Yeah, no, that was, that was me.
Okay.
Yeah.
We have a motion to second by Mr. White. I'll therefore proceed to call the roll. Mr. Fava, how do you vote on this motion for deferral?
Nay.
Mr. Scott?
Yay in favor.
Yay in favor. Mr. Metters?
Yay in favor.
Mr. White?
I will vote yay in favor.
And I will also vote yay in favor. So the motion for deferral passes 4-1 for the manner stated, for the reasons stated in the record. Mrs. Parrish, am I correct that because we have deferred on demolition, we cannot consider item number 6?
That is my understanding, yes.
Thank you very much. I do not believe that tonight's exercise was an exercise in futility. As has been stated by many people, this is an important decision. As we've talked about, historic preservation has become iterative, and the things that we preserve and why we preserve them is a shifting conversation. As to paraphrase Mr. White, it's not set in stone. So I don't think that tonight's decision to defer on this is without merit or is a dodge in any form or fashion, because it's a very important decision on a very important property, and that bears our additional deliberation. So I thank Mr. Metters for his motion. Is there anything from staff for the good of, or for the good of the board in general before we conclude tonight?
The only update that I could share is, I think we told you earlier, September 1st, we'll be moving to in-person meetings. That has been delayed till middle of September, September 15th.
Understood. I have not read any protocol, but I assume that that is on the basis of the uptick in the Delta variant.
That's correct. So we'll just continue to be nimble.
We will.
We only have one meeting in September anyway, right? So it would have been this the second meeting. I don't know.
Okay,
I have my doubts.
I'm as chairman of this board and as a member, I'm still looking forward to being at my first in-person meeting as a board member. Mr. Gow has raised his hand, and because he had the courtesy of doing a presentation to us, as long as we can answer his question, I'm glad to hear it. Tori, could you take a moment to allow Mr. Gow to speak?
Absolutely.
Can you hear me?
Yes, we can now. You have the floor, Mr. Gow.
So I appreciate all the patient deliberation and the care which the board takes in this matter. And we like to make sure that when we leave a meeting with this weight, that we have as much clarity as possible. And I understand the last 4 sentences to be a continued study of basically the ordinance, but the first 2, a definitive structural condition, and then original fabric that still exists. And so since I did visit the building with Mr. Metters yesterday, I just want to know, and since my engineer is on the phone, are we talking about an actual test of the material and the actual conditions of the material to try to date it? Or are we talking about a component by component list of what is old and original and what is newer and not original?
So, Mr. Gow, what I would say, just because I'm a lawyer and out of respect for this and try to not have administrative procedures issues down the road, I'm going to say that we were confined to the motion as stated, but as a courtesy to you, I will let Mr. Metters say what his intention was, so long as we have the understanding that the motion was as stated. But Mr. Metters, you can clarify what your intention was.
Mr. Chairman, because we have a future here and we have future meetings, I agree with what you just said. And I think that Tori should call me tomorrow if she has a question about that, which she will get from Richard, and I will clarify it from her and she can tell Richard. Otherwise, this will be happening every meeting, and I would be doing exactly what Richard's doing right now, just for the record.
And I think Mr. Gow can respect that. The motion is as stated. To the extent that clarification is needed, we will get that from staff. Okay?
That's all we can ask. Thank you.
Yes, sir.
Yes, sir.
Thank you for your patience, Mr. Gow. All right. Thank you all, and I look forward to seeing you at our next meeting, if not before, on a site visit. I hope everyone
Thank
had
you.
a nice
Thanks.
evening. Agenda item number 6 has to be tabled because of agenda item number 5. Look forward to seeing you all soon.
Thanks, Tori, Lawrence.
Thank you.
Thanks,
All right.
everybody.
Thank you so much.
Good night.
Thank
Bye-bye.
you all for
Hey.
your hard work.
Thank you.